one important line I want to point out to our viewers at home in that statement from a senior White House official. They say a direct military attack from Iran against Israel will carry severe consequences for Iran. It's unclear how the United States will respond as of yet, but we do know there are several assets within the region that could potentially respond to this barrage of rockets that we have seen on our screens headed towards Israel. Now, it's also important to point out that behind the scenes, diplomacy has been going on to de-escalate these tensions in the region, with Israel fighting against Hezbollah. Also, you have the situation in Gaza as well, with Israel fighting Hamas. So far, those efforts really haven't come to fruition. We haven't seen that 21-day ceasefire deal that the president and other world leaders wanted the Israelis to essentially come to terms with Hezbollah. That hasn't happened yet. And you saw this escalation tonight with Iran sending those missiles to Israel. According to the IDF, we haven't received a response from the White House. We have reached out to them to see if they have a response to this latest rocket attack, and we'll let you know once we hear it, Errol.
And what's interesting, Willie, is that about 14 hours ago, Secretary of Defense Austin did release a statement in which he spoke about having a conversation with Israel's defense minister, making it clear, I'm reading from this statement, that the U.S. supports Israel's right to defend itself. And though he added that there's a necessity of dismantling attack infrastructure along Israel's border with Lebanon, he goes on to say that civilians must be allowed to return safely on both sides of the Israeli-Lebanese border. Now that we've witnessed, again, it's just happened, so I'm saying it's what appears to be these Iranian ballistic missiles coming into Tel Aviv, and it appears to be the Iron Dome intercepting them. We can hear sirens now from emergency services on the ground. Now that this has happened, what must the U.S. do or say to bring peace to the region? And we're seeing more what appear to be artillery moving now.
Well, one of the things that you can almost anticipate will happen is that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden could potentially speak. We did hear the president talk earlier this weekend, or I should say a couple of days ago, and said that he will be talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu. No word yet on whether or not that call happened, but I anticipate behind the scenes here at the White House and at the State Department, at the Pentagon, the officials are scrambling to try to not only respond to this incident, but also come up with some type of plan, some type of response. As the official mentioned, that the United States will respond to this. Remember last time around when Iran sent these missiles and drones to Israel, not only was it the Israeli military that responded with its Iron Dome defense system, the United States and partners in the region responded as well, shooting down some of those oncoming missiles and drones as well. So with those assets in the region, that's perhaps one thing that the United States can do. There, of course, can be more sanctions. That's been a response from the United States oftentimes when we see these types of escalations happen. But diplomacy is one of those things that the Biden administration, the president, the vice president, and others talk about in terms of getting both sides to lay down their arms so those people, as you mentioned, can return to their homes.
I just want to reset for our viewers. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center in New York. Willie James Inman is at the White House as we bring you the latest information from Tel Aviv, where we're watching in real time what appear to be ballistic missiles being fired from Iran into the Israeli state. That is according to the IDF. And the fireworks you're witnessing appear to be Israel's defense, the Iron Dome system trying to intercept some of that incoming artillery from Iran. This as a response to Israel's efforts to protect its northern border from Hezbollah militants and incoming rockets there. Israel saying it is launching a limited ground operation in Lebanon in order to protect its citizens in northern Israel. I want to also now share this new information. The Secretary of State, Willie, we were just talking about a potential diplomatic resolution to this. Secretary of State Antony Blinken moments ago was set to deliver remarks at the International Counter-Ransomware Initiative Summit. This is in Arlington, Virginia. Our teams are reporting that he has canceled this public appearance amid this attack. The State Department saying a briefing now delayed. as U.S. intelligence and military teams recalculate what to do next. Willie, this is a dangerous moment, not just for politics and for regional stability, but for people living in Tel Aviv right now.
Yeah, it certainly is, Errol, and I can only imagine what it's like for the people living there and hearing those sirens go off, seeing those rockets up in the sky, and seeing the Iron Dome defense system work the way it's supposed to, the way it's designed to. I'll also note early on when this happened in April, some 99% of those projectiles, those drones, those missiles that were sent from the Iranians to attack Israel were shot down. Now, it's not 100% proof type system, but it does work pretty well. I'll also note with the president's schedule as well, Errol, we were talking about the Secretary of State. He has canceled a meeting. The president had a meeting scheduled with some Jewish leaders. That meeting has been scuttled. I anticipate the president perhaps meeting with his national security team. We are set to see the president later today when he receives a briefing on the damage and devastation of Hurricane Helene. So two disasters, essentially, that the president has to handle, one on the domestic front and one on the diplomatic front, with this response from Iran after the Israelis have really just attacked Hezbollah, have went in with their covert operatives and really done quite some damage to that organization in response to defending their citizens there along the Lebanese and Israeli border, Errol.
James Inman reporting from the White House for us. And on that point, we understand President Biden did convene a meeting with his vice president and his national security team earlier to discuss what was an imminent Iranian plan to launch significant ballistic missiles into Israel. We want to bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger. He's in the country. He's in Jerusalem. I'm wondering if you heard sirens where you are. We've been watching what's happening in Tel Aviv. Robert, bring us the latest.
Yes, also here in Jerusalem over the past 10 minutes or so, we've seen incoming, it's probably shrapnel. It looks like orange shooting stars, and the sirens have been going off. They went off twice. And we've also been hearing booms here in Jerusalem. As I say, I think this is shrapnel. Also, the Army spokesman indicated that that might be the case. Shrapnel from intercepted missiles, but this attack well underway. The situation here very tense.
Explain to me more why you think the IDF is saying it's incoming shrapnel. Is that because the so-called Iron Dome system is working and these perceived ballistic missiles are being shot down and broken apart? Help us understand that.
Right. Apparently, you know, I have to be careful about what we say. We don't know if maybe some of the missiles are getting in, but my impression was that what I saw, the orange shooting stars, if you will, was probably shrapnel from missiles that have been intercepted. And this is the Arrow anti-missile system, because apparently we're talking about ballistic missiles, those missiles that can carry hundreds of pounds of warheads. And Israel's missile defense is, of course, very good. We'll have to wait and see now. If the attack is apparently ongoing, and we'll have to see if any of these missiles get in. As I say, I heard booms. I don't have any reports of injuries or damage at this time.
All of this, Robert, unfolding in approximately the past 10 to 15 minutes. So we too sit and wait for confirmation of exactly what was incoming and if there have been any injuries. The IDF, at the very least, confirming that they are shooting down incoming projectiles. Outside of this, though, beyond the fear of people who are living where these missiles are incoming, there is an effort by the U.S. to reach some kind of diplomatic solution with Hamas, with Hezbollah, in the region. How does this change that, if at all? Does it increase the importance to get to some kind of peaceful solution?
Well, I think this escalates the situation really in a very serious way. There was broad speculation that Iran wasn't going to do this, but But now that it has, it puts the onus on Israel to retaliate. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said just yesterday, and also at the UN General Assembly a few days ago, that, and you can hear the sirens now. I don't know if that's coming through, but another round of sirens. Netanyahu said that if Iran attacks Israel, Israel will attack Iran. And that's the big question, if they will and how they will do that.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin did release a statement some 14 hours ago where he underscored the importance of the United States helping Israel defend itself, but also noted that there needs to be a diplomatic resolution required to help civilians safely return to their homes on both sides of the border. That he's referencing the conflict with Lebanon. Robert Berger is in Jerusalem hearing sirens. We've been watching footage from Tel Aviv, witnessing incoming missiles get intercepted. In our last few seconds with you, Robert, tell us what we can expect to happen next.
Well, the attack is ongoing. So right now, Israel is, I think, just is bracing itself and trying to intercept these incoming missiles. We'll have to see how long the attack goes on. And then the big question, how is Israel going to retaliate? Will it retaliate directly against Iran and send the regions toward a major regional war?
A live update there from our Robert Berger in Jerusalem as we watch live what appear to be Iranian ballistic missiles heading toward Tel Aviv and being intercepted. CBS News 24/7 will continue gathering all the information on this and bring it to you live. Our special coverage of this breaking news event continues with my colleague Reed Cowan in San Francisco.
You're watching CBS News 24/7. I'm Reed Cowan. So we have breaking news right off the top. Looking live here over my shoulder at Tel Aviv. And here's your headline. People in shelters there, sirens going off as Iran fires missiles into Israel. This information is sourced through Israeli defense official sources. This comes as the U.S. and Israel warned Iran in the hours that have passed in recent times that if Iran fired on Israel, there would be severe repercussions. So you are now seeing the skies there in Tel Aviv, not only the clouds hovering over, but also the concern that those missiles are on their way. Now, we can tell you that news is breaking, that so many people in the thousands are being told to either stay close, adjacent to a shelter, a bomb shelter, or to get into bomb shelters right now. We're watching the skies. We're also listening to see what we can hear. Word out of Israel in many parts is that those sirens are going off. In fact, those orders to shelter in place were sent to Israelis' mobile phones and announced on national television. Those alerts were sounded just a day after a rocket and missile attacks from Lebanon, and as Israel said, it had begun those limited ground operations in Lebanon. So once again, breaking news on CBS News 24/7 from the IDF officials. Iran has fired missiles at Israel, and now the reaction there on the ground. Let's listen in to CBS News coverage, taking it from here.
Blowing them up. We hear that one building in Tel Aviv was hit, but it does look as if most of them were blown out of the sky before they could do more damage. It wasn't only here in Tel Aviv, but also to the east of us and down south in the Negev.
As we heard from our contributor in Jerusalem, Robert Berger, he heard sirens there as well. U.S. intelligence was warning that this Iranian attack on Israel was imminent this morning. President Biden meeting with his security team to discuss a response. But from what you can tell, how much damage has there been?
It's very hard to tell. We shouldn't even really be outside right now. We should be in shelter, as should every Israeli. There's almost no traffic. We saw a lot of missiles being blown up by the interceptors. We didn't hear any bangs or crashes as if buildings had been hit, although, as I said, there was news that one has been hit. Sometimes you can see flaming shrapnel coming out of the sky, and that can do damage. But at the moment, moment, there is no sort of survey of what's happened. And we did get a warning a short while ago that there was going to be another battery of Iranian ballistic missiles. So we're sort of braced for that. You get about 2, 3, 5 minutes warning. Everybody then should really head for the shelters. And then, of course, we see the fireworks over our heads.
And of course, Liz, we want you and your team to stay safe. We appreciate you bringing us this real-time report. The IDF, that's the Israel Defense Forces, have said that the aerial defense array is identifying and intercepting launches. It appears at this moment that this attack from Iran has ended, but U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin just yesterday reiterated that the U.S. supports Israel's right to defend itself. He went on to say that there needs to be a diplomatic resolution when speaking with Israel's, what it describes as a limited ground incursion in Lebanon against Hezbollah. How much does all of this force the U.S. to help Israel defend itself?
Well, there are more U.S. military assets coming to the region. The Biden administration has made it very clear that it is going to support Israel. Israel, of course, has launched in the last few days another front in its war, attacking Hezbollah, and today, even today, going in limited ground incursions. We've had bombing all day and all night in Gaza. And the U.S. so far hasn't shown any sign of withdrawing support, either rhetorically or crucially in terms of military sales.
We know that from within Israel, they have warned severe consequences for Iran in the event that this ballistic missile attack would take place. But it is happening at a time of increased insecurity in the region. How might we expect Israel to respond to this?
It's such a difficult time to make those kind of predictions. As I said, there are two hot fronts in this war already. It's the eve of the Jewish New Year, the high holidays, so this should be a massive holiday and time for reflection tomorrow and the next day. And we're coming up on the anniversary of the October 7th attack. So passions are running very high. And on top of it, just a couple of hours ago, 2 terrorist gunmen got off the train about a mile from where I'm standing and began spraying the railway station in Jaffa, just down the coast, with gunfire. 8 people are dead in that attack, as well as the 2 terrorists. So the nation is feeling insecure, vulnerable, very much conflicted, and I think that probably the reaction, the strategy and the tactics to respond are being formulated right now.
It's interesting you mention the gunman attack. I had not heard that, but it is happening, as you say, at a time where we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attack, where Hamas militants, killed and kidnapped Israeli citizens. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been under increasing pressure all year to do something to get hostages released and to reach some kind of peaceful resolution, some type of pause in the conflict. Talk to me more about what Israelis are telling you they want from their government.
Well, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been demonstrating most nights, telling Netanyahu they're not happy. They think that he's going for victory as opposed to the hostages coming home, and they would like to see a deal with Hamas. Prime Minister Netanyahu has shown no sign of wanting to negotiate, and in fact, he has opened a new front in the war on Israel's northern border. That being said, the head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, also shows no sign of wanting to negotiate. So the hopes for a negotiated solution, a peace, some kind of stability, even a ceasefire, have pretty much melted away for now. And we're in uncharted waters. You know, this country was getting ready to celebrate the 1-year anniversary. Celebrate is the wrong word, to mark the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th massacre with meetings and prayers and demonstrations, and many families sitting and grieving together, those who have lost loved ones, those who still have family members held hostage in Hamas. It was going to be a time of reflection. Well, with this kind of insecurity, it's unlikely people are going to be able to congregate. Earlier today, the IDF said groups of more than 30 people were going to be banned. And so what should have been a time of perhaps healing and looking in a cool and meditative way at what might be possible is now going to be fraught and frightened and very uncertain.
Yeah, and we hear the sirens around you. We know that these types of experiences are traumatic for all people involved. That's our senior foreign correspondent, Liz Palmer, joining us from Tel Aviv. Of course, we want you and your team to get to a safe area immediately. We'll stay in contact with you. We want to move now to our CBS News senior national security correspondent, Charlie D'Agata, at the Pentagon, has spent much time in the region covering every aspect of this. Charlie, what's the latest word from the U.S. Department of Defense?
Well, Errol, ever since this morning, we heard those warnings or confirmation from warnings that we got from the White House that this attack was imminent. And I just have to paint the picture. They don't really like sharing intelligence for obvious operational security issues. But they had been tracking this for some time and believed that Iran had been positioned for an attack like this since August. So really, it was just a monitoring when they were going to press the button. Now, I can tell you, in light of that, the U.S. military has sent in considerable assets. And you may have heard in the past couple of days, as we've been reporting, more than 1,000 troops, new troops have been sent there. These are really air support defense groups. In addition, the past 24 hours, this morning it was announced F-18 squadron, F-15 squadron, F-16 squadron, A-10s, F-22s that are already there. The Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is there. We've got one destroyer. The United States military has got one destroyer there. And then we've got they've got 4 destroyers in the Red Sea. In addition to that, off the coast of the Mediterranean, where all of this is happening, you've got amphibious ships, 2,000 Marines there in case they need to evacuate citizens from Lebanon or in this case, Israel, because of what's happened. And they have F-18 fighter aircraft. Now, what we don't know, I just ran outside because we're watching all of this happening and they're monitoring it, obviously, much more granularly than we are, is whether CENTCOM, the military organization in charge of that area, has been involved with the intercepts of any of these missiles. Because on April 13th, the United States was very heavily involved, along with coalition partners. What we've seen, and I've been checking it out on television too, remember that Israel has its own competent air defense systems, not necessarily the Iron Dome for something that big, but you've got David's Sling, Arrow 3 that can intercept it, and that's what we've been looking at. So again, we are really in a wait and hold, an assessment, and we hope to learn in the next few minutes and hours how involved, if at all, the United States was in the defense of Israel during this salvo.
Yeah, Charlie, this is all unfolding in real time. And just to update our viewers on the latest information we're getting, we understand that the National Security Council says President Biden, Vice President Harris are monitoring what they describe as the Iranian attack against Israel from the White House Situation Room. They are receiving regular updates, according to the NSC. The president now has directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against Iranian attacks and to shoot down missiles targeting Israel. You just laid out for us some of the U.S. assets in the region. Defense Secretary Austin has said the U.S. will help Israel defend itself. But there is a risk at this moment of this becoming a much wider regional conflict. The Defense Secretary said there needs to be a diplomatic solution to all of this. How elusive is that today?
Well, he'd also been warning about serious consequences. And you mentioned that earlier about the conversation that he had with the Israeli defense minister. The Pentagon re-released that statement almost to double down, a statement not only to reassure U.S. and its allies, but a message to Iran. So the question now, and I think we also have to put the brakes on it just a moment. The U.S. military isn't there just in the defense of Israel, but there are 40,000 U.S. troops across that region, and they have been targeted in the past from Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, Iranian-backed militias inside places like Iraq and Syria. So part of that forward posture, as the military would call it, is in protection of U.S. troops too. Now, the big question is what will be the response from Israel? Or, as I said, we need to know how involved the United States and the military hardware in that region was involved in fending off this attack, because it was very involved last time. There are several destroyers launching, that can launch cruise missiles, that can launch intercepts. The USS Georgia submarine ballistic cruise missile is still in that area and capable. So they are forward postured. As a matter of fact, as it's been described to me, they're more forward postured. They've got more military hardware in that area than they even had on April 13th. So they were prepared for something like this. Just have to see how involved they've been.
And again, they are advocating for a diplomatic solution, but Secretary Blinken canceling his public events moments ago because of this. That's our Charlie Daggett, a senior national security correspondent, giving us the latest from the Pentagon. Charlie, thank you for that. Let's bring in senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang now with the latest from there. What is President Biden doing? What can we expect today, Weijia?
Well, Errol, we know that he is with Vice President Harris right now, monitoring the situation from the Situation Room. And as you mentioned earlier, they are getting constant briefings from their national security teams. But of course, all of this is unfolding so quickly. What is important is that the president did direct the interception of some of the incoming missiles to help defend Israel. And we do know that they were able to do that. And that is largely why back in April, the last time Iran struck Israel, that there was a limited amount of damage, a limited number of casualties because of this U.S.-led coalition, along with Israel's formidable Iron Dome defense system. So there was not as much damage as there could have been. But you are asking all the critical questions right now, Errol. I think the biggest one right now is what happens next and how much does Israel respond, because the president has been trying to broker some kind of a ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, not to be confused with in Gaza, but in Lebanon. In fact, I was at the United Nations in New York City last week, and senior officials there were on the sidelines urgently trying to work out the details of a ceasefire negotiation between Israel and Hezbollah via the Lebanese, and that didn't happen because days later Israel struck and killed the Hezbollah leader, which is exactly why we are here today. But I certainly imagine that the president will continue to stress the need for a ceasefire here because, as you've also mentioned, there are such broader implications. The other question, Errol, is what happens now in terms of a U.S. response. We know that the U.S. has warned there would be, quote, severe consequences if Iran were to carry out the strike that just unfolded before us. Back in April, those amounted to sanctions on several leaders and entities involved with the military. And so whether it's beyond sanctions or not, and whether those sanctions have any impact, are also outstanding questions, Earl. But we can tell you that right now, the president and vice president are monitoring the situation, again, in the Situation Room with their national security advisors. Errol.
That's Weijia Zhang giving us the latest from the White House on what appears to be an attack from Iran toward the Israeli state. You're looking at live images coming to us from Jerusalem tonight, approaching 8:30 p.m. there. We watched a short time ago from Tel Aviv as these ballistic missiles were coming in and being intercepted by advanced defense systems as sirens blared, not just around Tel Aviv, but Jerusalem as well, as all residents are advised to go inside to a safe place. We now want to bring in CBS News contributor Andrew Boyd. He worked for the CIA and State Department and can perhaps help us understand this quite complicated picture. Andrew, what do you make of what we're witnessing?
So we anticipated that the Iranians would retaliate in some way for the death of Hassan Nasrallah and one of their own brigadier generals who was killed in the Israeli attack in Beirut on Friday evening. There's going to be a lot of comparisons to the ballistic missile and drone attack in April. where 300 some odd missiles and drones were launched at Israel and were intercepted. If that is the limited extent of the Iranian retaliation, so to speak, against Israel, that likely will help to de-escalate the situation, because then Israel would not feel a compelling need to further retaliate against Iran. But if it is something more significant than what we saw in April with purely ballistic missiles, as some have been reporting, wherein there are civilian casualties, military casualties at Israeli military bases, then I think all bets are off, and I do think there will be a military response against Israel, and then the question is, what is the United States' role in all of that?
CBS News contributor Andy Boyd with the latest from your point of view. Thank you for that. We want to get back to Tel Aviv now. Our senior foreign correspondent Liz Palmer is there. Earlier, Liz, you mentioned that there was a terrorist gunman attack at a train station. And I just want to share with our viewers, it appears the Israel Defense Forces is making a statement at this time. I'm not sure if we can bring that to our viewers. Liz, what can you tell us is happening now?
Well, I've seen helicopters going overhead. The shooting happened not far from where we are, and these helicopters are transporting wounded from that shooting incident, or perhaps elsewhere. We're not sure. The last I heard, there were 8 killed in that incident, and I've just had handed to me the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps message about these 2 salvos of missiles that came in about half an hour ago now. It says that they were in response, the attack was in response to the martyrdom of Ismail Haniyeh, who was the head of Hamas, killed very dramatically inside the Guard compound in Tehran, and Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and one of his commanders, Neil Froshan. The Revolutionary Guard say we targeted the heart of the occupied lands, and if the Zionist regime reacts to Iran's operations, it will face crushing attacks. That may be a signal. Well, first of all, it tells us something crucial. We've been waiting for a long time, ever since late July, for Iran to respond to Haniyeh's very dramatic and embarrassing assassination. So this is the response we've been waiting for that. And then also it appears to be a revenge for Nasrallah's killing. And it may also be a signal that it's over for now. I can tell you that here at the hotel, we've been told that we have the all clear. We can come out of the shelters. And so now we're just going to have to wait to see if and how Israel retaliates.
At the very least, a very unnerving hour for the people there in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. That's our senior foreign correspondent, Liz Palmer, bringing us the latest as Iran says this is in response to what it believes is Israel's efforts to take out Hassan Nasrallah and others. We're, of course, going to continue to gather information and bring you more coverage on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Errol Barnett in New York.
I'm Reed Cowan. You've been watching a CBS News Network special report about the ongoing barrage of missiles fired from Iran into Israel and all of the fallout that comes from that. Right now, we have the opportunity to talk to CBS News' Robert Berger. He is live now from Jerusalem, and we understand a lot of people are still in a shelter and wait-see situation there. What can you tell us what's going on right now where you are?
Well, we just got the all clear from the Sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. We just got the all clear from the Israeli military. So it looks like this attack, at least for now, is over. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. And,
okay.
So you're saying that it looks like an all clear for now.
Right.
That's what our correspondent Elizabeth Palmer seemed to signal as well. Take us back in time, if you will, and let us know the first alert that you had that this was coming, what you did, and what so many people heard on the media and how they responded.
Yeah, so first we heard from U.S. sources that an attack from Iran was imminent. And then I would say, about 45 minutes ago or so, we heard sirens And then I went outside here in Jerusalem, and it looked like orange shooting stars were falling all over the place. I heard some booms. Those orange shooting stars, if you will, were apparently shrapnel from missiles that had been shot down. And then that came in two waves. There was sort of a break, and then there was a second wave. And what we're hearing is that nearly all of the missiles were intercepted, that some shrapnel did fall, but no one was seriously injured in this assault.
And of course, the big question now, as we await the sunrise on the other side of the globe where you are, what happens next? Will there be more attacks from Iran into Israel? And of course, what will Israeli response be, especially knowing that Israel continues to have the backing of U.S. military support? I'm understanding tens of thousands of U.S. troops are amassed there in the region. What response do you anticipate in the coming hours?
It looks like, according even from Iranian sources, that this attack may be over for now. But as you say, the big question is, what is Israel going to do? How is it going to respond? Just yesterday and last week at the UN, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Iran that if they attacked Israel, Israel would attack Iran. Now, this happened also in mid-April, and Israel's response under U.S. pressure was very muted. All it did was hit a couple of anti-aircraft batteries next to an Iranian nuclear facility. But the question is, what will Israel do this time? Will it escalate the situation with some kind of attack from Israel inside Iran? We have to wait and see.
So let's contrast that mid-April situation that you talked about when Iran fired those drones into Israel, always intercepted. The Iron Dome got it. However, we're understanding from our partners at the BBC that this was different, that the missiles sent were much faster and that there was some difference between now and April.
Yeah, in April, they fired 300 drones, cruise missiles, and also some ballistic missiles. Now, the drones and cruise missiles take a longer time to get here, so Israel was well prepared for that. These ballistic missiles that were apparently fired today, and according to Israeli television, about 150 were fired. They get here a lot faster. It only takes about 12 minutes, and they also carry hundreds of pounds of warheads. So this is really a major attack and escalation by Iran. And I think Israel, last time they were pressured by the U.S. not to respond, but the U.S. has said clearly this time that there would be severe consequences for this attack.
The world awaits to see what those severe consequences will be. Robert, please be safe. Thank you so much for streaming with us today.
All right, thank you.
We also have an opportunity to get to CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay. He is live from Tel Aviv. Chris, we understand that the all clear has been given, at least for now. Take us back in time to what you experienced and then forward to right now.
Yeah, well, the all clear may have been given, but actually just in the last few minutes, we were given another warning on our phone. In fact, it was at that time when people started to come back inside of this car as we speak. But this is where we've been for the past 30 minutes up until that point. It was a typical Tel Aviv Tuesday. Everybody was having dinner until all of a sudden we heard those sirens wailing. And, you know, Israelis are usually pretty sanguine about these types of alerts. They're not that uncommon, but this was a big one. And there was a virtual human stampede. Nobody got hurt, but it was just a dash for the nearest bomb shelter. And there are many, many of them littered around Tel Aviv. And we just got into the nearest one with dozens of other people, with their dogs, with their children, many of them having dinner. I mean, they kind of, life goes on as normal. But this is the kind of thing that we've been bracing for really for almost 2 weeks at this point, you know, and we started seeing those pagers and beepers exploding in Lebanon, those that belong to the Hezbollah members. And then we saw the head of their military get killed in those targeted strikes. And then finally, the head of the organization itself, Hassan Nasrallah, was assassinated just on Friday. And so everybody's been bracing for something like this. In the meantime, we knew that there were thousands and thousands of missiles at least trained in the direction of Israel, and people were expecting to see something big coming from the direction of Hezbollah and Lebanon. Instead, we've only seen a few hundred rockets here, a few hundred rockets there. Many had suspected that it was because their launchers had already been taken out by Israel. But then the question was, well, why isn't Iran doing anything about it? And it appears like they answered that question tonight.
Chris, we understand President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are in the Situation Room, and they are very much staying on top of this. In fact, they ordered some defense to help defend Israel and get some of those missiles out of the air. Looks like successfully at this hour, some shrapnel hitting the ground. But you are with the people every day. And we know that there's going to be a military response. The warning is that it would be a severe military response. But what about the response on the ground from the people where you live and where you work, the people of Israel? How are they feeling about this and the escalation?
You know, the people of Israel have been rather downtrodden ever since October 7, when Hamas carried out that horrible massacre and the kidnappings, and not to mention the subsequent invasion of Gaza. It's seen an immense loss of life on the part of the Palestinians, and that's not something that the people of Israel celebrate. And so it's been a hard 11 plus months for them. But for the first time, ever since Israel has had win after win after win against Hezbollah, the much more formidable enemy, this is the enemy that Israel has been preparing to fight for years and years. In fact, it just goes to show you how well things have been going for Israel in Lebanon in the past few days compared to how poorly they were going in Gaza. It showed you that they were completely caught off guard when it came to Hamas back on October 7th. But they've been ready for this in Lebanon. And so they're finally seeing, the Israelis are finally seeing their military do what they're supposed to do. Netanyahu said it last week, enough is enough. They're tired of watching Hezbollah fire upon northern Israel for more than 11 months. You know, there are around 70,000 Israelis who have been forced to flee their homes because not only are they afraid of rocket attacks, of which they've been virtually every day, but they're also afraid of another October 7-like event. In fact, Israel says that they've captured plans from some of their recent cross-border incursions into Lebanon, into Hezbollah territory, plans for another October 7-like event. So Israel says that Hezbollah was planning to carry out something like October 7th here again, all of this time later. So even though Israelis have lots of mixed feelings about this government, the direction of the war, the last 12 days have been different. They've finally gotten the wind in their sails, and they've finally been able to restore deterrence in the region, something that had completely vanished.
Well, and as we come up on that terrible October anniversary, we are also mindful that while all of this plays out, hostages are still being held by Hamas right now. Chris Livesay in front of a shelter right there. We're grateful for your report. Please stay safe. Our best thoughts with you and the people you are with today. Okay, CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gossis joins us live right now from the U.S. Department of State. Olivia, we understand President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris are watching this closely. Any indication what they mean by if Iran fires, and we now know they have, there will be severe consequences. What could they be?
Sure, and that was a step beyond what we heard the last time in April when there was that direct attack from Iran on Israeli interests. The U.S. sending a very strong message of deterrence, telling the Iranians to keep this response measured. As Chris was saying, there had been widespread expectations that the Iranians had to do something just because of all of the escalatory steps that the Israeli military had been taking for weeks and months, taking out a top military commander in Beirut, assassinating Ismail Haniyeh, a top Hamas commander in Tehran in July. Of course, those spectacular pager operations that affected hundreds of Hezbollah fighters, as well as Iran's ambassador to Lebanon earlier this month, culminating with this huge strike on Hassan Nasrallah, Iran's sort of most potent leader in the region, the head of Hezbollah. And that was a very clear turning point that likely affected Iran's calculus. Up until now, the U.S. and Israeli officials had been saying they had been able to forestall a retaliatory strike from Iran with a combination of deterrence and diplomacy. That means not only the U.S. posture in the region, but the diplomatic effort, sending messages to the Iranians, incentivizing them by saying a Gaza ceasefire was on the table and could see a breakthrough. Obviously, that carrot has much diminished, no longer really of appeal to the Iranians, which may have affected their calculus after the strike of last week to take this step. We have gotten a statement from the Iranian mission to the UN here in New York, a CBS colleague relaying that they have said their legal, rational, and legitimate response has been duly carried out. Should Israel retaliate, they warn a subsequent and crushing response. As you've been reviewing, the questions now remain, is this the extent of the response? Has it affected any U.S. interests in the region? Are there more waves of proxy attacks that are still in the offing? And have any of them been successful? Have there been any casualties?
All right, we just lost Olivia right there, but coming back in just to sort of reiterate and contrast that with the April situation where Iran also launched drones and missiles. When you look at the contrast between April and now, we're seeing some things are the same and some things are different. In April, those drones didn't go as fast, so the U.S. and Israel were able to rally in the sky and very quickly make sure that they were blown out of the sky before they caused much damage there in Israel. This was different. This was different. We understand that this time the missiles were faster, and so the scramble was quicker. But also, going back to April, we saw after the first barrage of missiles and the drones, Iran did what they just did a moment ago that Olivia just broke here on CBS News 24/7, and they said that basically the mission has been realized. And, you know, then it begs the question, what will the response be? Listen, when the United States says, if you push this button, if you fire, there will be severe consequences, the question is what those consequences will be and when will those consequences be exacted on Iran, on Hezbollah. So we continue to watch this and we continue to compare it to the last time we're in this very same place. Different weapons used, a different speed of weapons used, but a similar situation where in the night we saw what one of our correspondents talked about as looking like orange firecrackers in the sky there. The Iron Dome missile response, the shrapnel falling to the ground all over parts of Israel. But we also are now starting to see the very similar situation where Iran seems to signal with their language, A, they believe this was justified. In fact, they use the term legal. But B, this now realizes the extent. So is it the extent of it? And how will any escalation and involvement by the United States really prolong this and make this even bigger? Will the United States be drawn in to a larger conflict? Really, we have two situations going on here. In recent days, Lloyd Austin said he hopes for a diplomatic solution. He hopes for talks to be productive, not only with Israel and Hamas, getting a ceasefire in Hamas, getting hostages released, but then over into Lebanon, where Israel is now doing battle, and there's some battle on the ground as well between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. The hopes, though, for diplomacy continue on. But at the same time, those voiced hopes for diplomacy are going on, releases from various governments. We're also seeing U.S. troops amass there in the region, some 40,000 U.S. troops amassing in the region, all of them with the mission, number one, to protect Israel and to protect each other in what is a region that is ever more and increasingly tense. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer joins us live from Tel Aviv. Elizabeth, you've been in and out of shelter in recent hours. The last time we saw you, you were streaming here on CBS News 24/7, but also network television. You were wearing a helmet. It looks like, from the fact that you've taken it off, that things are a little more sedate now.
Yes, indeed. We had an all clear from the hotel, so all the guests have come out of the shelters. I can see traffic's picking up on the street. Crucially, Israel, as we heard from the BBC, has opened its airspace. And so that does mean that the attack is over for now. Our colleagues in Tehran have been texting us saying that in Iran, on Iranian television, this is being portrayed as a huge success, that they're claiming that 80% of those ballistic missiles, more than 100, hit their targets, and there's a catastrophe and ruin everywhere. In fact, the IDF is saying that some were not intercepted, and so they're going out to have a look at where they landed. But crucially, there don't seem to be any casualties. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard have made it clear in a statement that this was what they called their retaliation for the deaths of Ismail Haniyeh back in July. He was the head of Hamas, and he was killed very spectacularly and embarrassingly inside the Revolutionary Guard compound by, we think, a rocket while he was visiting, and also retaliation for the death of Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed in an airstrike last week in Lebanon. So that appears to put an end to this Iranian escalation, and now everybody's wondering whether Israel is going to respond, and if so, how.
You take out the possibility of Israel responding, and you contrast this with what happened in April. There does seem to be some similarity in how Iran sent the drones in, the missiles in, and then said, this is it, this is the chapter closing, so to speak, and then a similar statement tonight relative to that. Do you see that contrast as well?
I do, and I think that you have to bear in mind that the Iranians are very much playing to a domestic audience. They had said they would avenge the death of Ismail Haniyeh. The death of Nasrallah has been massively embarrassing in Iran, and they had to be seen to be doing something. We will hear from the Israeli Defense Forces in the coming days whether this was designed to be more a show of force than really designed to do serious damage. It may have been a little bit of shadow boxing, but I mean, very lethal, dangerous shadow boxing, but nevertheless not a prelude to a full-scale war.
In Iran, for those who are watching Iranian state TV and they are hearing, as you reported, that this was a resounding success, that 80% of those missiles hit, which we believe to be untrue, are they able to hear reports such as from ours over the internet? Are they able to hear reports from Israel, or are they in a vacuum? What is it like on the other side?
People who want to know can know. There are a lot of satellite dishes and now streaming potential, and one huge source of information, very solid source of information, is the BBC, which broadcasts in Persian into Iran. So many people will be watching that either clandestinely or more overtly, but they'll be putting it onto all the social media feeds, Telegram certainly. And so those who want to know can know. There's also a great layer of Iranian society, religious, inclined to support the revolutionaries no matter what, and they won't know, or they will absorb what Iranian state media are telling them because it confirms their biases. It confirms their loyalty to the supreme leader and the regime. But Iran has one of the most active, lively social media networks in the world. And I would say that probably anyone under 30 who wants to know has no trouble finding.
Well, and it sounds like we just lost Elizabeth right there, but what she just said speaks to what we just got, a statement to the people of Israel from an IDF spokesperson. And to that point of information, the flow of information back and forth, it seems that the people of Iran are able in some way to monitor the social media feeds of the people in Israel. And the reason I bring that up is this. This is the admonition from the IDF to the people of Israel. At this very hour, we ask that you do not provide any information to the enemy and refrain from sharing locations or footage from areas where there may have been impacts. So the people here who saw what went on in the sky, who heard the intercepts going off in the sky, who saw the shrapnel fall, and maybe, yes, maybe some of those missiles making contact, they are being told by Israeli Defense Forces, do not photograph it, do not videotape it, do not put it on social media, because in their words, it provides information to the enemy. That statement goes on to say, we are on high alert both defensively and offensively. We will defend the citizens of the state of Israel. This attack, they say, will have consequences. And underlined and underscored, we have plans and we will operate at the place and time we decide. So once again, looking live at various spots on CBS News 24/7 inside of Israel, where they have been watching very closely those missiles sent from Iran towards Israel. We are also watching what's going on in the White House press briefing room, and we'll continue to watch that closely. You see the empty podium there. The world is awaiting to see what the Biden administration has to say. We're going to toss into Errol, who is joining us right now from CBS News headquarters.
I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York as we continue to follow breaking news. Iran has launched a missile attack against Israel. And we want to show you a video that we aired a short time ago as the rockets were incoming into Israel. The IDF says those explosions were the incoming missiles being intercepted as people in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv were warned to head to shelter. You heard some of the sounds there. Iran's mission to the UN says this attack has now been completed. It released a statement saying if Israel retaliates, quote, a subsequent and crushing response will ensue. Now, this attack came in response to the Israeli military launching what it described as a limited incursion into southern Lebanon and the killings of several top Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. This is part of Israel's efforts to combat Hezbollah in the region and to secure its own safety. We want to give you a sense of the bigger picture here, where this conflict is taking place. You can see just how far physically Iran is from Israel. They're separated by Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Iran's leadership has been facing pressure to respond to Israel after its troops went in on the ground in southern Lebanon. Now, U.S. defense officials say that the United States helped intercept some of the incoming missiles to defend Israel. Israel's Iron Dome system, for example, was seen shooting down the missiles as they flew over the country. Officials were telling people there to shelter in place. The latest information from the IDF is that it's safe to exit. Now, explosions were heard in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and at this stage, the IDF says it isn't aware of the full extent of damage or potential casualties just yet. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is on the ground in Tel Aviv covering this story for us. And Liz, the last time we spoke, you had your protective jacket on and your helmet because you were in the target zone. Tell us what you're hearing now and what that experience was like.
Well, we were in the shelter first and then decided to creep out to see if we could see the interceptors. And as soon as we got out onto our balcony, we could see all the missiles coming from the east, so from Iran, and being intercepted over our heads. It's remarkably quiet, but you see these flashes of light and then the slow fall of the shrapnel, often glowing. It was very hard to know then whether anything was being hit. We didn't hear any loud crashes or booms. And as you said, the IDF has since said that although they say some of the incoming missiles did hit the earth, there don't appear to be any casualties, which is very good news. Shortly afterwards, the hotel told us that we were free to come out of the shelter, and I can see the traffic is getting back to normal on the street. I even saw a man walking his dog. So Israelis who have nerves of steel because they're used to this are getting back to life pretty quickly. Although I must say, I think we spoke earlier about the shooting attack that happened just a mile down the coast. That's rattled people. You know, two men got off a train and started spraying the area with bullets. It was a terrorist attack. And although both of those terrorists have been killed, the night feels full of danger.
And despite your description of folks there having, nerves of steel, I can just imagine that experiencing this type of thing on a semi-regular basis affects people. It impacts them psychologically. And we know that what's at the root of this, it seems, is that there is pressure to reach some type of ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. We're approaching the one-year anniversary of Hamas's incursion into Israel. And so the events that unfolded today, does it seem, Is it something that Israelis will be even more interested in a diplomatic solution to the conflict?
Yes, because everybody wants security, but it has never looked so remote. I was here myself 2 weeks ago, and people were approaching the anniversary of the October 7th massacre, starting to say things like, we really need to get this negotiation done so the hostages can come home and then move on to the massive task of rebuilding and perhaps even beginning to talk about how the Palestinians might have their own state in parallel with Israel and so on. That's just 2 weeks ago. I can't tell you. That feels so remote now tonight. We have a hot war in the north now. Gaza, there's been bombing night and day. The terrorist attack, the Iranian attack, it feels unstable, and honestly, constructive thinking just is out of sight. It's just not happening. Very sad.
And I would imagine it is somewhat of a wake-up call, not just for people there in Israel, but the entire region, that things have escalated and could get worse. Do we have any sense of how Israel might respond and the U.S. might help?
I think those plans are being made now. This attack, while it was anticipated, nobody knew exactly how big it would be and how serious it would be. It's an escalation, and Israel is probably deciding now how to respond and whether it can afford to amp up its military effort. Its army is very tired. They've been fighting hard in Gaza for a year. We've now got land incursions into Lebanon. The Israeli military establishment and politicians would be thinking very, very hard about the risk of getting overstretched. It's too early to tell what we're going to see. Everybody's breathing a sigh of relief, and it'll be all eyes on the politicians in the coming days.
It's just remarkable to see some of the footage from a short time ago. Liz Palmer, we appreciate your reporting as always. Stay safe. We now want to bring in retired Army General H.R. McMaster. He's a CBS News foreign policy and national security contributor and served as former national security advisor to then President Trump. Great to have you here at a moment like this. I'm curious, as much as this was in some ways signaled to U.S. intelligence and could be expected, what do you make of what we've all just witnessed?
Well, Errol, I think what you're seeing is the folly of de-escalation and the continuing talks of a ceasefire. What that has allowed Iran to do is to escalate on its own terms with impunity. And I think it's really important to understand that Israel is probably in a more as precarious a situation that has been in security-wise since 1948. And this has been a long war. I know you and Liz were talking about, how the Israeli population has been under this kind of threat, certainly since October 7th, but you could really say they've been under this kind of threat since 1948. It's also important to remember that if you were to adjust for population, that the mass murder and the heinous attacks of October 7th would have been the equivalent of about 50,000 Americans. So we keep talking about a ceasefire with Hamas. How's that possible before they destroyed? In the next breath, we say, oh, and we'd like to get negotiations toward an enduring peace and maybe a two-state solution. Well, hey, Hamas is an organization that is dedicated to destroying Israel and killing all the Jews. It doesn't sound to me, Errol, like they're signing up for a two-state solution. And I think the lesson for October 7th for Israelis is you can't have a terrorist organization like Hamas and certainly like Hezbollah on your border with those capabilities. There are 80,000 Israelis displaced from about 10% of their territory along the border with Hezbollah. So when we talk about de-escalation, I just wonder, what are we talking about? And what we've done these days, I think, Errol, is we talk as if we can only be on the defense. Hey, that doesn't work in football, doesn't work in rugby, and it doesn't work in war. So I think what you're going to see is a much larger and more significant response to Iran than you saw in the April massive attacks against Israel, when they kind of did a demonstration by taking out an air defense system in the interior of the country to say, hey, look, we can blind you from outside of your airspace. And I think what you'll see Israel do is everything they can to strike, the missile sites, missile factories. I think that they should hit drone factories and drone sites. And I think it's an opportunity also. And I think the United States should consider options also to join in strikes against nuclear facilities and missile facilities. I mean, Iran is a country that has terrorized the region. Hey, Errol, Iranian proxies have conducted about 175 attacks against U.S. forces and locations since October 7th of last year. We've responded to about 11 of those. But every time we talk about de-escalating, which I think sounds great to the supreme leader.
And I want to share with you, HR, that the UN Security Council now expected to convene tomorrow and discuss Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel. Based on what you've just laid out then, what would you do next if you were commander-in-chief and you were able to direct the U.S. military to respond? Because what you're also alluding to is that there is a constant back and forth between these two seeming warring sides, decade on decade.
I think, Errol, first of all, the Biden administration deserves credit, and so does our fantastic armed forces for working together with a coalition to, again, defend Israel against a massive onslaught. So what U.S. Central Command has done, I mean, this is not easy, this kind of integrated air defense. It's really hard to do. So I think that's step A, help defend Israel. But I think step B now is, now that Hezbollah has been hit so hard, right, with the pagers, with the walkie-talkies, with the direct attacks against their leadership, really wiping out their leadership, Errol. It's time to make sure that Iran doesn't have the cash flow and the resources to rebuild Hezbollah, to continue to sustain Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas. Hey, how about the 40,000 strong Iranian proxy army in Syria, or the militias that they're using to tear apart Iraq, or the Houthis, who have also fired on Israel, fired on shipping, and are starving children to death by besieging Yemeni cities. I mean, it's time for this to end. And I think what we have to do is constrain the resources available to Iran, and then also, go after those who are aiding and abetting Iran with other sanctions. As I mentioned, I would bring to the president at this stage, Errol, military options as well. You have to think those through, obviously, because that begins more of an interaction. But, Errol, I think Iran is very weak, very weak. This theocratic dictatorship has worn out its welcome with large numbers of Iranians. We should have a big informational campaign and a public diplomacy campaign to get around their authoritarian firewalls and reach the Iranian people with a message like, hey, isn't it time for you to change the nature of your government that has deprived you of so much, so it can create so much violence and hardship and, displace and murder and wound half the Syrian population, for example? I mean, I think that we've got to try to reach the Iranian people, dry up their resources, and we should entertain military options against their nuclear and missile facilities in particular.
It's an important point you make when you reference the difference between a government, a regime, and the people. No matter which country we're speaking about in the region, there sometimes is a wide gap between what the people of that nation want and what the government wants to accomplish. You've just laid out a scenario in which you feel as if there needs to be a military response, the U.S. needs to back Israel up, and perhaps there needs to be more financial penalties on Iran and its proxies. But from what I understand, that effort is underway. There is an effort to convince Iranian people that they can turn to a different direction. So what's the missing piece from your view? I know you're saying you give the Biden administration credit. What's missing?
Well, I give credit for the defense, right? But again, not the offense. I mean, they've been really weak on enforcing sanctions. Errol, it's been terrible. I mean, because of the Biden administration's kind of effort to conciliate the supreme leader in Iran, Iran has raked in about $100 billion based on unenforced sanctions. And they've been transferring directly, previously frozen funds to the Iranians. Remember, on October 6th of last year, the day before the heinous attacks, they had $6 billion sitting in the Qatarese bank, ready to transfer to Tehran. I mean, I don't understand why this administration has continued the failed policy of really the Obama administration in an effort to be conciliatory with the supreme leader. And, the Iranians play us, Errol. They just had this guy, Pezeshkian, the new president, visiting New York while we provided security for him, even though he's got a hit on a former president and a presidential candidate, which is crazy to me. But he had a message of conciliation. Really, are we going to fall for that again? There's this idea that if we are nicer to the Iranians, then the so-called Republicans in Iran will be strengthened, and they'll begin to marginalize over time the revolutionaries. Hey, but newsflash here is the revolutionaries won, and they're in charge, and we can't, and we can no longer buy in to this plan of this deception on the part of the Iranians. We have to look at that regime for what it is: a theocratic dictatorship that is determined, A, to push us out of the Middle East, so B, it can have its way with Israel, destroy Israel, and kill all the Jews. And part of its strategy, Errol, is to keep the Arab world perpetually weak by keeping it enmeshed in conflict. So it builds these militias and terrorist organizations that lay outside of the government's control, so they can be turned against that government if it acts against Iranian interests. That's why Hezbollah has essentially captured Lebanon. That's the case in Iraq. It's the case in Yemen. And it's what they've done with the proxy army in support of Assad's murderous regime in Syria. So, hey, where are the college protests about that? About the horrors that Iran has visited on the Middle East.
Well,
and
yeah,
I think we ought to be outraged about this across the civilized world.
It's an interesting point you make, and I want to focus a bit more on the U.S. side of all of this, because you worked for former President Trump. We're in the midst of an election now. There's a vice presidential debate tonight on CBS. The timing of this may be an aspect of the calculation as well. Do you have a sense that how the U.S. responds to this, the current Biden administration and the sitting vice president, who of course is running for president, might it have an impact on the outcome of the election? And if so, how?
I think it should. I think it exposes what I would describe as the fecklessness of the Biden administration's approach toward Iran. They've really had a hard time. I mean, you're just acknowledging what the return address is for all this violence in the Middle East. And, I think that, the Trump campaign will certainly highlight that, but I think what I'm hoping for is that both parties, that the Biden administration now, as well as a future Trump administration or Harris administration, will recognize that this mantra of de-escalation, all it does is give the Iranians this freedom to escalate on their own terms. And, it doesn't make sense, to only play defense. When does that make sense? Ever. And I think Iran gets away with it because, from their perspective, they're willing to expend every Arab life, every Palestinian life, in their objectives of establishing hegemonic influence across the region, kicking the U.S. out of the Middle East, and destroying Israel. And I think we just can't let them get away with that anymore.
We appreciate your insight. CBS News foreign policy and national security advisor H.R. McMaster. Unfortunately, we'll need to bring you back and talk about this more as things develop. But thanks for your time today. We now want to cross to CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon, gathering new information on all of this. Charlie, what's the latest from your point of view?
Yeah, well, Errol, since we last spoke, I can now confirm, according to defense officials, U.S. forces have been involved in defending against that Iranian attack, or attacks, I should say. U.S. forces are currently defending against Iranian-launched missiles targeting Israel. We will remain postured to provide additional defensive supports, also in defense and protection of U.S. forces in the region. So this is a step forward for U.S. forces there, because although they were part of the defense for Israel and U.S. forces on April 13th, in the weeks of attacks from Hezbollah, that has solely been on the Israelis. They've been using Israeli defense mechanisms to stop Hezbollah rockets from doing any serious or significant damage. So it's been Israel's defense systems that have been intercepting. There has been some sharing in terms of intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance, but not in terms of, they would call it here, going kinetic, actually firing weapons at other weapons in order to intercept them. What we don't know exactly is where those weapons were fired from, but I can tell you there are a number of destroyers in the Eastern Mediterranean that are positioned to and have been used in the past to intercept weapons like we saw. There are also destroyers in the Red Sea. There's a Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, strike carrier group, and a couple destroyers with that too. So they were already in place for this. And they also knew that the Iranians had been in place, as my colleague Liz Palmer noted earlier, since August. They've been expecting this mass Iranian retaliation. We've seen it from Hezbollah, but they've been preparing for this.
And Charlie, that's kind of the micro picture at this moment, but you've done extensive reporting throughout the region, and earlier we had a map kind of showing U.S. assets in the region. Help us understand the other Iranian-backed militant groups which have targeted U.S. assets in recent days and months, because that's also a part of the U.S. decision to not just defend Israel, but to defend itself and its interests in the region.
Errol, it's a big part of the consideration. I'm told here all the time, now that I'm new here, this is a planning organization. You know, they plan for all sorts of contingencies. And many people are surprised when I tell them how many U.S. troops are operating in that region. 40,000 U.S. troops across the region. Many, many more when you consider all the aircraft and ships and vessels. Submarine is in the region. There's a reason that they're there, but it also means that they get targeted. And as you alluded to, you have Iranian-backed Houthis who've been targeting U.S. naval ships in addition to commercial ships in the Red Sea, and the United States has engaged. They've had to shoot down a barrage of cruise missiles and drones even in the past week. Additionally, as Mr. McMaster was just saying, U.S. troops have been targeted more than 150 times since October. So these are U.S. troops that are based either in Iraq or Syria or throughout the Middle East, some overt, some covert, but they've been targeted by Iranian-backed militias. In the past, there has been some retaliation, most importantly if anybody is hurt in those attacks or there's any serious damage. But there is a significant U.S. military footprint in that region, far from just in the defense of Israel, but just in terms of American interests alone.
There is also one perception, understanding that Iran launched a similar surprise attack on Israel in April. None of those missiles hit, it seems, their intended target. And this appeared to be 2 rounds of ballistic missiles that then ended. And of course, there was some telegraphing of this earlier today, because U.S. intelligence was at least publicly warning this attack was imminent. Was this then a sign, a signal from Iran to Israel, and less so an effort to create incredible damage?
Yes, well, Errol, let's remind our folks what happened on April 13th. That was telegraphed, partly because they sent a number of drones. These are slow-moving unmanned aerial vehicles. That absolutely telegraphed that it was on the way, and there was intelligence that they picked up. When we talk to people here, whether there was a sort of, whether it had been orchestrated or whether there were back channels, I'm always driven away from that narrative, that necessarily isn't how it unfolded. But there are very obvious steps that made the Israelis and the Americans and coalition partners aware of what was coming, and more slow-moving weapons that could have been intercepted. And we're talking about more than 300. So that was a significant attack. But as you saw those images, and as our colleagues inside Israel witnessed for themselves, these were fast-moving. I don't know from my standpoint in D.C., whether they were ballistic, but they were certainly fast-moving weapons. They were big. Iran's message is, A, we can reach you. If possible, they might even be able to overload Israelis' air defense systems. And I'm not talking about the Iron Dome. That's more in terms of rockets. I'm talking about David's Sling and Arrow 3. These are things that take care of bigger, faster-moving weapons. And yes, as we understand it so far, and here they're assessing the damage. In Israel, they're assessing the damage. It looks like most of them were intercepted. But when you intercept explosives like that, and I've seen it in Israel, I've seen it in Ukraine, those things land and they do damage because they don't land in one piece. So that in itself, you might intercept it and take out the payload, but there's a lot of damage on the ground when there's so much stuff flying around. So yes, Iran sending a message, we have that reach. That's very clear, and they can move weapons very quickly. I think the launch time to impact was about 12 minutes. It's quick enough for the Israeli defenses to try to intercept, and also, of course, for America's advanced missile defense systems to activate. But also where these rocket attacks or cruise missile attacks or ballistic missile attacks hit, you saw it all over Tel Aviv. This is way beyond anything that Hezbollah or certainly Hamas is capable of. And that's what makes them a serious threat. And now, as everybody before me has been saying, now we wait to see what Israel's reaction is going to be.
And Charlie, as you were speaking, we've got a live shot of Jerusalem this evening as it moves into the late hours. And we were just looking at some footage earlier, I believe from Tel Aviv, as some of the incoming weaponry was intercepted. Iran is saying that if Iran's mission to the UN specifically is warning that if Israel retaliates, there'll be a crushing response from Iran. Surely Iran would expect some type of response, especially backed by the U.S. Is that fair to say, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, it is complicated when we talk about backed by the U.S. You know, what nobody would ever talk about here is whether there's a scenario where the United States would attack Iran itself. And what we saw on April 13th with this massive attack, most of it intercepted, not doing much damage, the Israelis did respond, but it was a limited retaliation, a limited response. In my experience, whenever Israel is attacked in any way, like it was from the Houthis a few weeks ago or a couple of days ago, they responded and retaliated. If it comes from Hamas, if it comes from Hezbollah, absolutely, you've seen what's happened. So I can't imagine this is going to go unanswered. However, as we've been reporting here in D.C. and elsewhere, from the defense minister to the White House and National Security Council, trying to de-escalate. We are expecting to see this retaliation. They've been prepping for it as a military organization, but at the same time trying to push for diplomacy. And they also realize that diplomacy goes hand in hand with trying to find a peaceful resolution with Hezbollah. I mean, really, Iran's fighting force in order to find a resolution and diplomatic solution there in order to de-escalate. But, you know, what we've seen is the opposite. I mean, escalate by de-escalating or de-escalate by escalating.
And Hezbollah, of course, one of the most powerful armed groups in the Middle East, so a significant entity. Charlie D'Agata, always great to lean on your extensive experience and your latest reporting on this still developing story. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Errol.
We now want to bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger from Jerusalem. Last time we spoke, you were hearing sirens in the distance. We understand the IDF has given the all clear, but give us the latest, Robert, from your point of view.
Yes, as you say, the all clear after 2 waves of attacks from Iran, with the sirens going on here in Jerusalem and actually all over Israel, and these sort of orange shooting stars looking like of shrapnel falling here in Jerusalem. I could see it from where I am and actually all over Israel. And now the all clear. So, but still, the nation's shaken up. And the question is, what happens next? How will Israel respond?
And we know that if we rewind a year ago to the October 7th attacks from Hamas into Israel, that the push for some type of ceasefire and hostage release from Hamas specifically is what predicated what we're now seeing as far as Israel's ground incursion into Lebanon, which is reported, but we've not yet confirmed. What is the Israeli hunger for a ceasefire? I mean, considering that you and other people living there experience this, the sirens and running into a basement, as part of regular life.
Well, people are tired. I mean, it's nearly a year of this war. A lot of soldiers have been killed, and a lot of soldiers are doing reserve duty month after month. People are exhausted. You know, this kind of attack also affects businesses. For instance, restaurants in Tel Aviv, which are popular, preparing food all day. And this came on all of a sudden. It was with very little warning that this attack occurred, and all these restaurants had to close down. So people are tired. But having said that, you have a year of attacks from Lebanon by Hezbollah that have put 60,000 Israelis at least out of their homes. And then also the war in Gaza, which we're talking about less nowadays, still hasn't really been resolved. And you have 100 hostages there that, of course, everyone wants to see come home. But I would just say it's the situation is unresolved. And so people feel that Israel has a right to defend itself, and the government is threatening to take very severe action.
I believe it was last week at the UN General Assembly when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a fiery speech and then was rushed with his team, the Israelis releasing images that appear to show him on communication devices before the attack that killed the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Do we know where the Prime Minister is today, and has he released a statement yet on this incident?
Not yet, but the cabinet, the security cabinet, is due to meet shortly to discuss what Israel's response is going to be. And obviously, we've heard from certain Israeli officials, not the prime minister himself, that Israel has a right to defend itself. And that we're hearing also from sources, government sources, that Israeli reaction will be severe.
Robert Berger, our contributor, joining us from Jerusalem with the latest on this unfolding event. We appreciate your insight. Thank you for that. And for those of you just joining us here on CBS News 24/7, I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York as we continue to gather information after Iran launched a series of missiles into Israel. We're still waiting for word from the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, on if there have been any casualties or damages, but we watched live pictures as its defense systems intercepted those dozens of missiles that were incoming. Also, we are standing by at this moment for a news conference from the White House, the State Department, and the Pentagon. We do expect officials to give us an update on what will be a U.S. response to these attacks on Israel shortly. As soon as that comes to us, of course, we'll bring it to you live. We now want to bring in CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis. She's following all of this for us from the State Department. Olivia, as this was unfolding, the Secretary of State canceled a public appearance he was meant to deliver. What is the latest information from your vantage point?
Sure, Errol. And as you mentioned, we are awaiting those briefings from various government agencies. But Secretary Blinken himself appears to be back on regular schedule. He's expected to meet within moments with the Indian foreign minister, who is here in Washington to meet with the secretary. And it appears right now as though the U.S. government is not anticipating further developments. It's too soon to say with definitive surety, but that appears to be the situation. We know on a bigger picture that the Biden administration's overwhelming goal since October 7th has been to forestall a regional conflagration that draws in multiple actors. Arguably, it's hard to say that hasn't already happened, but the crucial indicator will be what Israel does from here and what the U.S. determines to do. Obviously, this morning, officials vowing severe consequences if Iran takes this step, but it's worth noting that Iran had been holding back for weeks, if not months, as Israel took a number of escalatory steps, taking out a Hezbollah commander in Beirut in July, followed by the assassination in Tehran of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, for which the Iranians did not retaliate. Those spectacular pager attacks that we saw in September that affected the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. All throughout that, U.S. and Israeli officials have said that it was a combination of deterrence and diplomacy that kept the Iranians from taking a broader retaliatory strike. That all changed once the Israelis took the very monumental step of eliminating Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, last week. I was in a room full of senior Israeli officials minutes after that strike was taken at the UN General Assembly. And, the question was posed whether or not the calculus was made, whether this would draw in the Iranians or deter them further. Obviously, we've seen something of a measured response so far from the Iranians. Remains to be seen whether they've hit any targets, caused any civilian casualties, affected any U.S. interests. But if this is the extent of it, you can expect the U.S. to be working diplomatically in overdrive to persuade the Israelis to keep their own response contained and, again, prevent the region from tipping into a broader escalatory spiral. That's what they've been working on from the get-go.
And it's fascinating, Olivia, because at roughly this time last week, while you were at the UNGA, I was asking you, it's all about diplomacy and peaceful resolutions. How the heck do we get there? And you said it remains elusive. Now we have this happening, and the consistent the consistent thread from U.S. government officials appears to continue to be de-escalation. But based on your reporting, based on what you saw last week, based on what you're seeing now, how do we get there?
It's very hard to imagine, Errol. I mean, the Gaza ceasefire efforts seem to have dwindled and diminished in recent weeks. At the end of August, Hamas essentially disengaged. We had not heard from Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, engaging with negotiators from Israel, from Qatar, from the United States, who had been trying to put forth a bridging proposal in order to get that over the finish line to start phase one of a ceasefire in Gaza. U.S. negotiators switched their efforts to broker a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah. That was sort of what the focus was last week, the U.S. coordinating a group of more than 10 international allies to sign on to a call for a 21-day ceasefire. They put that on the table on Wednesday evening. By Friday morning, we had heard of this giant strike by the Israelis in Lebanon on Hassan Nasrallah. And so that the prospects of that kind of a ceasefire agreement coming to pass also evaporated in an instant. Those senior Israeli officials did indicate at the time that it's something that's worth considering. They said that they would consider sending an envoy to entertain those kinds of ceasefire discussions, but now is most certainly not the time for the U.S. to try to push those further, although I'm sure the messaging will be that de-escalation and diplomacy is the right path forward. That's consistently what they have said until this point.
And Olivia, I'm wondering what sense you pick up from how Israeli and U.S. officials interact with each other, because for months, if not a full year, we've heard this disconnect of the U.S. saying we need to find a peaceful resolution, a ceasefire and de-escalation, and Israel consistently saying we need to defend ourselves against incoming attempts to wipe us off the map. That's the typical phrase from Israeli officials. From what you can tell, how do they, I don't know, get along? How do they communicate with one another on this highly contentious topic of how to reach the goal of peace?
Sure. Well, it's important to note, I think, that the conversations take part on multiple levels amid multiple officials and agencies. You know, the conversation is not in a singular channel. And absolutely, those channels have been tense. They've been contentious. There have been sharp words exchanged among nothing less than the leadership level. President Biden has been candid about the fact that he has been very forthcoming with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But there are also sort of working level talks that take place day to day with officials exchanging information about what's going on. That diplomatic churn behind the scenes sort of fills out the policies that the U.S. tries to coordinate with the Israelis. Even in the case of this 21-day ceasefire, we understood from senior U.S. officials that that proposal had been based on close consultations with senior Israeli officials. It wound up being the case that the Israelis decided to pursue a different avenue, obviously not the diplomatic outcome that the U.S. was hoping it would agree to, but seizing the opportunity to take this strike on Nasrallah. And so I think what that indicates for you is that national interests will almost always trump diplomatic engagement. But of course, again, these are very close and tight allies. The conversations are continuing, and U.S. officials have always argued that the reason that they can have candid conversations is because the relationship is so close, despite how strained it may have gotten over the past almost year.
Olivia, I think it's so useful for our viewers to hear that from you, that there are layers of diplomacy taking place between nations, and ultimately each nation has to protect its own interests, but still the conversations, the dialogue, the efforts to get to a peaceful outcome continue. Thank you very much. Stay close. We'll certainly lean on your reporting in the hours ahead. We now want to bring in Courtney Keeley. She's a Middle East analyst and has spent more than a decade living in the region in places like Beirut and Jerusalem. Courtney, great to have you with us as we kind of take a breath now and step back from what is really frightening to witness, even from afar. What do you make of what we've all watched unfold today?
This is a provocation. This is an aggressive stance by Iran that has been provoked by Prime Minister Netanyahu's incursions and offensives, which we haven't talked about. So I'd like to bring you to the ground.
Sure.
I'd like to give you the bird's eye view of these tiny countries on the Mediterranean. Gaza, decimated after the Hamas massacres. Hostages are still there. Families want them home. They're protesting against Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's not in a stable position domestically. Then we move up to Tel Aviv and then over to Jerusalem. different people with different agendas in Israel, but they do not want to necessarily be under missile attacks. And this is Iran showing their hand of their range. Because in 2006, it was unclear what their range was. And in 2000, when Hezbollah used to send Katyusha rockets or World War II weaponry across the border into places like Kiryat Shimona, which is now empty. So we've seen war up to these places. So I'll take you up to the north. That is empty. 100,000 people, refugees from Israel in the south on the border of Gaza. And then you've got the northern Israel emptied. Prime Minister Netanyahu said, I will go up there and empty southern Lebanon so it's empty like our north and our people can come back. What they just did in Israel to Hamas was, to Hezbollah, because Yahya Sinwar is still sitting in Gaza. What they were able to do with Hezbollah in the last 2 weeks was almost disintegrate an organization that has been hostile on their border, where you can, bird's eye view, you can see their flags, they can see the Israeli flags, you can see the Hezbollah flags. It is a tiny border. You do not need binoculars. And now you have all of southern Lebanon up into the Bekaa of refugees fleeing the south. You've had airstrikes on Beirut, 2,000-pound bombs dropped to get Hassan Nasrallah out. Hezbollah in Lebanon is a state within a state. So you do not have a government that can come in and broker peace with the U.S. necessarily, because they only have an interim prime minister. So you have such an instability in Lebanon to Israel's north. And now Netanyahu has moved to his ultimate foe, the existential threat that he has been talking about for over a decade, for decades, in fact, if you go back to his career. It's all about Iran. 2011 at the UNGA, not last week, but at 2011, he held up that Acme bomb and said the nuclear threat is from Iran. We had U.S. officials said the threat is Iran. And now it's clear the provocations have gotten up to a point, and they're on a precipice. Israel can defend itself up to a point, but Israel's also in southern Lebanon with their troops right now, on the border. There's all sorts of vulnerabilities and all sorts of power vacuums that are being tested right now into Syria and Iraq. So this is regionally, straight up the coast, right. And then it's huge of how it affects everybody.
And we're not talking about one group versus another. There are so many groups being impacted by this. And what I like about what you've just laid out, taking us to the ground, is that while we're talking about state actors like Israel, non-state actors like Hezbollah, you've got refugees, some who fled Syria during its civil war to Lebanon, who are now fleeing southern Lebanon to get out of the way. Based on your reporting and the people that you've spoken to in all these places, what's the psychological effect on life in this part of the world?
It's devastating. The humanitarian crisis now that has been unleashed into Lebanon, into Syria, matches or will match the devastation of Gaza in certain pockets around southern Lebanon. So for the last 2 weeks, since the walkie-talkies and the pager explosions, people have been fleeing out of there, expecting airstrikes, and it happened. I was watching very carefully to see what would happen to Hassan Nasrallah, the longtime leader of Hezbollah, since 1992. He may have been involved in the Marine barracks bombings, but that was the inception of Hezbollah. Their former shadowy leader, Mughniya, was the mastermind behind that. Israel and the U.S. took him out with a car bombing in Syria. All of this has a longevity and blood oaths and enemies within enemies. So many of them have been taken out right now. Hassan Nasrallah being taken out of Hezbollah, I really am curious as to see if Hezbollah will continue to exist. I don't know. In his ideology, in its Shia iconography, he will be considered as similar to a saint. The Sunnis don't have saints and they don't have this. Hezbollah will. But right now, what you're sending refugees that have fled Syria into Syria, and I'm hearing reports of them being vulnerable to be conscripted by President Assad into the army. They fled President Assad's brutality, and now they're being pushed into the border. Some of the war-torn children that were burned are being walked 2 days out of southern Lebanon, who are Syrian, who have been getting help from organizations. And I'm seeing reports from humanitarian organizations of where are they sleeping. And also, Lebanon has a broken financial structure. They have no money. They have refugees. They have this disintegration of Hezbollah. There's going to be a need for massive intervention for all of these people, and we're not even there yet.
Courtney Keeley, stay with us here. I also want to bring in Samantha Vinograd, a CBS News national security contributor, formerly served as the Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention at the Department of Homeland Security. Sam, based on what Courtney just laid out, all the different groups and factions and interests, even when you consider the innocent people all over the region who are being impacted by this and have to flee, how does that factor into the U.S. calculation? I don't know about how to fix it, but how to respond to it in a way that does de-escalate what seems to be an escalating war.
Well, Errol, we are due to hear from the National Security Advisor any moment, and typically in any Situation Room meeting that I was in, the safety and security of American citizens in any jurisdiction topped off the agenda, and I am certain that that is the case right now at the White House. As we think about the humanitarian situation on the ground, we do have to remember that there are 40,000 U.S. military personnel in the region. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of diplomats and likely hundreds of thousands of American citizens in the region, most of whom live there permanently. Many of them are dual citizens. So the U.S. government is prioritizing the safety and security of U.S. citizens in the first instance. When it comes to the catastrophic humanitarian impacts of terrorist proxy groups implementing attacks across the region, which have characterized the Middle East for decades, if not centuries, as well as the conduct of Israeli operations in Gaza and through their strikes in Beirut and elsewhere, that is always a top priority for the administration. We heard National Security Council...
Sam, I apologize for interrupting you, but U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken now speaking following this Iranian attack on Israel. Let's listen.
The relationship is at a level we've never seen before. And I think it's a reflection of the value that both countries attach to this partnership. A partnership in so many different areas, including strategic technology sectors, including space, including semiconductors, including clean energy, where our countries increasingly are working together and creating new opportunities for people in both India and the United States, but also more broadly than that around the world. And of course, the critical role that India plays on the global.
All right, we're going to pull away from the Secretary of State for the U.S. as he's moved on to other topics. I do want to remind viewers that we are standing by to hear an update from the White House on this situation. Sam, you were just speaking to us about the 40,000 U.S. citizens in the region who, of course, need to be protected, but there's also a humanitarian layer to the strategy that the State Department and others are making and how to respond to what happened today. Pick up on your last thought there.
Yes, and Errol, just to clarify, it's about 40,000 U.S. military personnel. There are hundreds of thousands of American citizens in the region, including diplomats as well as individuals that live there permanently, most of whom are dual citizens. The humanitarian aspect of how Israel is conducting its operations and how terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and ultimately the Iranian regime, how they put civilian lives at risk is always a foremost consideration for the administration under any president that I've worked under. That is why we have heard President Biden publicly, as well as Vice President Harris, as well as White House Senior Advisor John Kirby, stress that they have been in close communication with the government of Israel about how Israel is conducting its operations in places like Gaza as well as Lebanon. Prime Minister Netanyahu does not appear to be listening to the White House on many of those matters, but the White House has been on record with him. However, we do have to remember that these terrorist groups, again, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, conduct their operations and knowingly put civilian lives at risk. So while Israel is being rightfully urged to exercise restraint and to minimize any impact on civilian lives, and from a humanitarian perspective, Iran and its proxies are certainly not taking the same approach.
Hate to do this again to you, Sam, but the White House has started its briefing. Let's listen to Jake Sullivan.
It occurred earlier today. I can take just a few questions because this is an ongoing situation and I need to get back to my desk. Today, Iran launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles towards targets in Israel. The United States military coordinated closely with the Israeli Defense Forces to help defend Israel against this attack. U.S. naval destroyers joined Israeli air defense units in firing interceptors to shoot down inbound missiles. President Biden and Vice President Harris monitored the attack and the response from the White House Situation Room, joined in person and remotely by their national security team. We are still working with the IDF and the authorities in Israel to assess the impact of the attack. But at this time, and I stress at this time, we do not know of any deaths in Israel. We are tracking the reported death of a Palestinian civilian in Jericho in the West Bank. We do not know of any damage to aircraft or strategic military assets in Israel. In short, based on what we know at this point, this attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. This was first and foremost the result of the professionalism of the IDF, but in no small part because of the skilled work of the U.S. military and meticulous joint planning in anticipation of the attack. We are also aware of reports of a terrorist attack in Jaffa that took the lives of a number of Israeli civilians and wounded several others today. Our condolences go out to the families of the victims and to the family of the Palestinian civilian in Jericho. Obviously, my update here is based on early reports, and we reserve the right to amend and adjust as necessary as we gather more information. The word fog of war was invented for a situation like this. This is a fluid situation. We will consult with the Israelis on next steps in terms of the response and how to deal with what Iran has just done, and we will continue to monitor for further threats and attacks from Iran and its proxies. We are particularly focused on protecting U.S. service members in the region. And with that, I'll take just a few questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. Is the administration making any preparations to evacuate U.S. citizens from Lebanon or elsewhere in the region?
We have been very clear for some time now that U.S. citizens should avail themselves of commercial means to depart Lebanon, given everything that's going on. We have said that from this podium, from multiple podiums. We continue to say that, but we have not begun triggering a non-combatant emergency evacuation, a NEO, and do not have an intention to do so at this time. If that changes, we'll let you know. But we continue to reinforce the point. American citizens in Lebanon should follow the guidance from the State Department, which is to find civilian commercial means to depart, because in extremis, we may not be able to get them out safely. Yes.
Thanks, Jake. What is the U.S. view on whether Israel should retaliate, and what is your concern about this leading to a wider escalation of war in the region?
We've had some initial discussions with the Israelis in the aftermath of this at the military level and also at the White House to Prime Minister's office level. We'll continue those conversations in the hours ahead. I'm not going to prejudge or get ahead of anything. We want to have some deep consultations with the Israelis, and I'll have more to report to you after we get the opportunity for deeper discussions.
And escalation in the region?
Obviously, this is a significant escalation by Iran, a significant event, and it is equally significant that we were able to step up with Israel and create a situation in which no one was killed in this attack in Israel, so far as we know at this time. We are now going to look at what the appropriate next steps are to secure, first and foremost, American interests, and then to promote stability to the maximum extent possible as we go forward. Yeah.
Back in April, the president's message to Israel was to take the win when the U.S. and Israel were able to intercept the barrage of Iranian missiles. Is he recommending a similarly limited response this time?
I will not, from this podium, share the president's recommendations. He will have the opportunity to share them directly. We're going to have, as I said, ongoing consultations with the Israelis this afternoon, this evening. It is too early for me to tell you anything publicly in terms of our assessment or in terms of what our expectations are of the Israelis or the advice that we will give them.
So will he be speaking to Prime Minister Netanyahu today?
I don't have anything to announce from this podium, but I can tell you that he is tracking this minute by minute. We are very much deeply in touch with the Israelis, and insofar as we have calls to read out, we'll make sure to read them out with you. Just last question, then I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Jake. In April, after Iran struck Israel, the U.S. issued a number of sanctions as a consequence. This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are those consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
Totally legitimate question, and that answer will come based on the conversations and consultations we have with our Israeli counterparts It's too soon for me to stand before you today and give you an answer. What I can tell you is this. We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake. Okay, on to the rest of the programming here. This morning, President Biden was briefed by his Homeland Security Advisor, Liz Sherwood Randall, on the latest impacts of Hurricane Helene, and this afternoon he will receive an interagency briefing on the Hurricane Helene response and recovery efforts. At the President's direction, the Biden-Harris administration continues to use every tool available to get assistance and resources to the communities that need them the most. Yesterday, the President approved a major disaster declaration for Georgia, which will unlock additional assistance to help those recovering. This is in addition to the major disaster declaration swiftly approved by the President following requests from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida, as well as requests for emergency assistance across 7 states. Tomorrow, the President will travel to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he will visit the State Emergency Operations Center to meet with local officials and also first responders. And the Vice President will travel to Augusta, Georgia tomorrow and will then head to North Carolina in the coming days. As of today, thousands of personnel from across the federal workforce are deployed and supporting state-led Hurricane Helene response efforts across the 6 affected states, including over 1,200 personnel in North Carolina. Still, there is more work to be done, and the Biden-Harris administration will be there for these communities every step of the way. Now, as you can see, we also have Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas.
Thank you, Corinne, and good afternoon.
All right, we're pulling away from the White House press briefing. Corinne Jean-Pierre updating us on the recovery efforts after Hurricane Helene and the storm ravaged a large part of the South in the U.S. And before that, we heard National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan give the latest information on Iran's attack against Israel. Sam Vinograd is still with us and was speaking about kind of the national security perspective on all of this. I'm wondering, Sam, you've got some new reporting to share with us and also your response to what Mr. Sullivan did and did not say.
Well, Mr. Sullivan did make some important comments about Iran's intentions here. And based on conversations I've had as well, I think we have learned that Iran was trying to impact damage here. Mr. Sullivan called this, I believe, the largest and most violent missile attack by Iran against Israel. And my sources have been sharing that Iran did intend to create significant damage against Israel, but they failed. Why did they fail? Because the United States and Israel together instituted a multi-layered air defense system that prevented almost 200 Iranian missiles from causing damage. Now, Mr. Sullivan did provide a note of caution and said that there's still assessments underway, but at this time, it does appear that those 200 missiles did not lead to any fatalities, which is incredible to think about. But as we take a step back and think about what's next, Ariel, where does this go? It does appear that Iran was not necessarily looking for an off-ramp. They were not necessarily looking to stop the escalation in this conflict. And that's an important data point as we think about what Israel's response might be. Last time, after Iran launched aerial projectiles at Israel, Israel struck near to a nuclear facility in Iran. This time around, Israel may feel pressured to take bolder action based upon Iran's actions today, as well as Iran's ongoing support for terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, Errol.
Well, Sam, I want to connect that with something you mentioned before the White House press briefing that stood out to me, in which you had said the U.S. was communicating to the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, that finding some type of resolution with Hamas, finding some type of off-ramp with Hezbollah is the preferred option. And it appeared, based on what you were saying, that the Israeli Prime Minister was not listening, considering this was the largest, most violent attack against Israel. And it seems, based on this early information, that there were no fatalities, partly because of U.S. help. Does that change the calculation? Is Netanyahu encouraged at all now to listen to the U.S. more?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the United States has dual objectives here. In the first instance, the United States has a strong objective to ensure that Israel has both the right and the ability to defend itself. The administration has been crystal clear on that. At the same time, the administration has assessed that a ceasefire and hostage release deal for Hamas, along with allowing humanitarian aid in, as well as a ceasefire in Lebanon, would be in the best interests of Israel's security in the near term, as well as American and broader geopolitical dynamics around the world. So for that reason, the United States has been urging diplomacy rather than military action by Israel. But we should make no mistake that the president has been quite clear that Israel does have a right to defend itself. And after Israel suffered yet another attack by Iran today, I think Mr. Sullivan hedged when it came to what should the Israeli response be. He said we'll engage in consultations and Iran will be punished. He did not say Israel should, to quote another U.S. official, take the win and take a step back. He said there would be ongoing consultations, Errol.
Sam Vinograd joining us from our Washington bureau. We really appreciate that up-to-the-minute information you're providing with us. And for our viewers joining us at this time, we are covering the breaking story of what the U.S. describes as the largest and most violent attack against Israel by Iran as it launched more than 200 ballistic missiles toward the country that at this hour do not appear to have led to any casualties. The White House says that's in large part to the U.S. support of Israel and interception of those missiles. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand joins us from the White House now, also tracking the Biden administration's response. Natalie, what's the latest information you're gathering?
Well, Errol, as we heard from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he described this as meticulous joint planning and described that it was U.S. naval destroyers who joined Israel's forces in shooting down those missiles. He described them as 200 ballistic missiles toward Israel. He also called this a significant escalation by Iran. But as you and Samantha were describing and discussing, it's unclear the next steps. He says that the U.S., in consultation with the Israelis, will look at and try to determine the appropriate next steps. It was actually our Wei Zhang in that press briefing who referenced an earlier statement by the White House ahead of today's attack when a senior administration official said that if Iran carried out this attack, consequences would be severe for Iran. And Sullivan, in response to that, said that at this point, that answer is going to come based on the ongoing conversations, the ongoing assessment of impact on the ground in Israel, which from early assessments, based on what we heard in that White House press briefing, Jake Sullivan stressed that at this time, he said, we do not know of any deaths in Israel. But again, he stressed that that is at this point in time that impact assessments are continuing to be made. He also said we don't know of any damage to aircraft or strategic military assets in Israel. So based on that, how does that factor into the calculations for next steps? We'll have to wait and see. I can also tell you, Errol, that according to the White House, the president and vice president monitored this response from the Situation Room. They've been meeting with their top national security leaders and advisors. The consultations with those individuals, as well as with Israeli counterparts, will continue into the evening. And ahead of this attack, we know that the White House was also trying to stress that while it's beefing up U.S. military assets in the Middle East to try to deter further escalation, they also continue to work on the diplomatic aspects behind the scenes, which you've been talking about all afternoon long. President Biden on Sunday, when asked by reporters whether an all-out war can be avoided in the region, he said, quote, "It has to be." Errol.
And what's interesting, Natalie, during the White House press briefing, as Jake Sullivan was pushed on the consequences, he did say there would be severe consequences. And the question was posed, will that include sanctions? He didn't want to commit to anything at this stage. Do we have any sense, based on previous statements either by the president or his team, on how this might impact U.S.-Israel relations and how the U.S. might respond to Iran based on this attack?
Right. I think a lot of these questions just too early to answer at this point. But we know that ahead of this attack, the U.S. military footprint in the Middle East has continued to increase. There was an enhanced defense posture, going into this weekend after the Israeli strike that killed the Hezbollah leader. So we know that assets were in place, were continuing to be moved, and the Pentagon has also stressed, according to our great reporting from Charlie D'Agata, that the U.S. Military presence was enhanced compared to what we saw in April during that initial attack by Iran on Israel. So we'll have to wait and see what additional movements occur and how that's all impacted by Israel's next steps, the conversations that are going on behind the scenes with the top leaders, and how President Biden is able to relay his point of view to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, and we understand this is all happening in real time as we continue to cover this breaking event. Natalie Brand, live for us at the White House. Thank you. We want to cross to CBS News contributor Robert Berger now joining us from Jerusalem. We know the all clear was given during our last conversation. Robert, I'm wondering what new information you can share with us now.
Well, the Israeli cabinet is due to meet at this hour, the security cabinet, to discuss what Israel is going to do next. And of course, it's a dilemma. But what we're hearing from Israeli media is that Israel is planning a severe response. So while Iran is saying that this attack is over for now, the Israelis, who had 181 missiles fired at them, ballistic missiles carrying hundreds of pounds of explosives, they have to decide how they're going to respond, and their response could escalate the situation even further.
To me more about what an expected response may be, considering there remains diplomatic pressure to de-escalate tensions right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something that's been speculated about for quite a while in Israel. And last time in April, when Iran attacked with 300 drones and ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, Israel's response under U.S. pressure was relatively mild. They hit an anti-aircraft battery outside of an Iranian nuclear facility. So I would expect something tougher than that this time, unless the U.S. holds them back. Options include hitting things like Iranian oil facilities or Iranian infrastructure,
And
like
Bob, I
bridges.
apologize to have to interrupt you during that answer, but we now see that the State Department is speaking to the press, and we want to get that information to our viewers right away.
Seen Israel take to defend its civilians, and what we've seen Iran
I'm not trying to
take.
suggest that they are equivalent. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't see.
No, we have certainly seen we've certainly seen Israel expand the nature of its attacks against Hezbollah, but is a very different type of attack than what we saw today from a state actor against another state.
Okay, and then last one, and this has to do with Lebanon and the northern front. The situation there is, unstable and uncertain. I know that you guys have been asking Americans who might want information about assistance and possibly leaving to sign up on a form. Can you give us an update on the numbers of those and whether or not you're planning to I don't know, to do anything in the way of either U.S. government capabilities or charter flights or ferries?
Sure. So you're right. As we often do in these situations, we have directed U.S. citizens who are in Lebanon to register with the State Department for information, and especially for information with how to depart Lebanon, and we're providing them whatever information we can. We have had, as of today, around 6,000 American citizens in Lebanon who have registered with us for further information. Should be clear, Not all of those American citizens are seeking assistance with departing. People are just looking for information. They're looking for options. There are a number of American citizens who live in Lebanon who have lived there for years and do not want to depart the country. So in terms of the status on the ground, the airport is still open. Commercial flights are operating, although they are available at times at reduced capacity. We are working right now with airlines to provide additional flights with more seats for American citizens. It's something that we hope to turn on in the next few days, and we will be in touch with American citizens if and when we're able to expand that capability.
How do you ensure that there are going to be seats reserved for Americans?
We're working with, I can't get into the details, but we're working with commercial carriers to ensure that capability. And when we have further information and we've locked this down, it's something we'll communicate directly.
All right, Matthew Miller there, speaking on behalf of the State Department. We're bringing this all to you in real time, and we pull away from this so we can get you to the Pentagon. Department of Defense Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder now speaking to reporters following this Iranian attack on Israel.
Israel for confirmation, and any questions on that, is they're in a better position to discuss. Please note that we're still assessing the attack and the outcome, so numbers may change as we receive updates. Additionally, no U.S. personnel were injured or harmed during the Iranian missile attack. Secretary Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General C.Q. Brown Jr., and U.S. Central Command Commander General Eric Kurilla have been in constant contact with President Biden and Vice President Harris throughout the day to consult on the situation and U.S. actions. In addition to his phone call earlier this morning with Israeli Minister of Defense Gallant prior to the Iranian attack, Secretary Austin spoke to the minister again just a short while ago to get an update. He reaffirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to the defense of Israel and underscored that the U.S. remains well-postured throughout the Middle East region to protect U.S. forces and defend Israel in the face of threats from Iran and Iran-backed terrorist organizations. We'll provide a readout of that call as soon as possible. To be crystal clear, as Secretary Austin has said, should Iran, its partners, or its proxies use this moment to target American personnel or interests in the region, the United States will take every necessary measure to defend our people. And separately, I do have an update to provide on DoD support to Hurricane Helene response efforts, but I'll provide that at the end. With that, I'm happy to take your questions. We'll start with AP. Tara.
Thanks, General Ryder. What Navy destroyers were involved in helping shoot down and intercept? And given this escalation, what's being communicated between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant right now in terms of tampering things down and potentially avoiding a wider war?
So the two Navy destroyers involved were the USS Bulkley and the USS Cole. In terms of the conversations between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant, I won't get into the private discussions other than to say we are consulting closely with them on next steps and the continued defense of Israel.
And then, are there any plans underway to conduct a NEO given the increased risk of a wider war?
Right now, there has been no order to evacuate. As you've heard us say before, we are a planning organization, so we, of course, plan for all contingencies. But as of right now, State Department has not called for an evacuation. Jennifer.
Should we assume that the SM-3s were used by the Cole and the Bulkley to shoot down or to intercept the missiles?
I'm not going to get into the specific type of ordnance, Jennifer, other than to say, again, they fired a dozen interceptors.
And Iran said that they gave a heads up to the U.S. and to Russia. How much warning were you given by Iran?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any pre-warning by Iran about their potential attack. As you know, this is something we've been following very closely for a while based on the threats of retaliation by Iran. And so we've been closely consulting with Israel for a while now to be prepared in the eventuality. And as today demonstrated, we were prepared and we were able to successfully work alongside Israel to defend them from this attack. Let me go to Carla.
Thanks, Pat. You said that the destroyers shot down Iranian missiles. Where do they come from? Were they all from inside Iran, or was some also from Yemen being shot by the Houthis?
Carla, to my knowledge, and again, we're still assessing this, these were all launched from Iran, ballistic missiles. And what I said was that they fired the interceptors towards those missiles. So.
And then were any other U.S. assets involved in this defense?
Of course, we have a lot of capability in the region, a lot of things that are there to be prepared for a wide variety of threats. But in terms of the launching of these interceptors, it was those 2 destroyers.
So just being clear, no ground-based interceptors were used in this.
Correct.
Were the were you aware of any duds that didn't fire off that maybe Iran wanted to fire more than the roughly 200?
As I mentioned, we're still assessing the outcome of the attack, and so we'll have much more information later. But these are all, our initial reports.
And then on the second call with the Secretary and Minister Gallant, did he urge Israel not to respond or to moderate any response to Iran, or did Gallant share any of Israeli intentions for their potential response here?
Well, again, as I'm sure you can appreciate, I'm just not going to be able to get into the details of their call, other than to say, again, we're consulting closely about next steps and the continued defense of Israel.
What does Secretary Austin think about the potential for an Israeli response here? Would he urge them, without saying what he said in the call necessarily, but what are his feelings about the potential? Would he urge them restraint or?
Well, look, if you take a step back here, we fully support Israel's right to defend itself. You just saw a very significant ballistic missile attack by Iran against Israel. And so, we'll continue to work alongside them to support their defense. We, of course, do not want to see a wider regional conflict. You've heard us say that many times, and we'll continue to work towards that end. But we also fully understand the fact that this was a significant attack by Iran, and so we're going to continue to consult closely, and we're going to continue to support their defense. Let me go to Laura.
Thank you. Just a couple of clarifications. Did you say that the U.S. destroyers had intercepted or shot down the missiles, or just that they fired?
I said that they fired approximately a dozen interceptors against the incoming Iranian missiles.
And were there any U.S. aircraft that shot interceptors at Iranian missiles?
What I've read out is what participated in the defense of Israel. Okay.
And then, sorry, just one more. Can you say if there were any drones or cruise missiles that were involved in the Iranian
Again,
attack?
still assessing it right now. It appears it was ballistic missiles, no drones, but again, we'll continue to assess. Let me go to Joseph, and then we'll come here.
Thank you. Just wanted to turn to the Israeli invasion in Lebanon. For the past couple of months, the department and the secretary have called for de-escalation. You guys have voiced your opposition to any ground incursion, invasions, limited operations. After we found out that the Israeli strike last week killed the Hezbollah chief, Hassan Nasrallah, it seems like the tone changed. From the statements last night, the department and the secretary said they supported what Israel is doing. So what changed for a change in that tone and that stance from the department?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, Joseph, is we fully support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah. As we understand it, they will be conducting limited operations to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure that's arrayed along the border there that could be used to threaten Israeli citizens. And so we're continuing to consult with the Israelis to better understand how they intend to go forward. Obviously, I'd refer you to them to talk or ask questions about details regarding those operations. But we fully understand as part of their overall efforts to return people home that they do need to address those threats that are along the border there. And so all that to say, we will continue to consult with the Israelis and other partners in the region long term about how we can ultimately de-escalate those tensions and get to a ceasefire.
Have they asked for any help from you guys doing whatever it is that they want to do?
No. Yes, sir.
Were the United States surprised by the scale of the Iranian attack on Israel?
Well, look, like I said before, we've been monitoring this for a while. Iran had been very public about its threats to retaliate, and so it's something that we've been monitoring. Certainly, this was a significant attack, probably about twice the size in terms of scope of what we saw earlier. But again, we're still assessing the outcomes of this. And as I highlighted at the top, we certainly condemn this reckless attack, this direct attack against Israel, and we'll continue to support Israel's defense.
Several Israeli media spoke about a response tonight, Israeli response tonight to this attack. including some, not just Iran, some other Middle Eastern countries. Will the United States be assisting the Israelis in their response?
Well, I'm not going to speculate about hypotheticals. I'd refer you to the Israelis to talk about, you know.
I'm asking about, will the Americans help them with their response?
Well, what you're asking me is if they're going to do something, and what I'm saying is I'm not going to speculate about what or if they may do. As I highlighted to several of your colleagues, we're consulting closely with the Israelis in terms of next steps, with the emphasis being the defense of Israel. So let me go to this side of the room. Oren.
Essentially a follow-up to that question, is the U.S. willing to strike Iran in response to this? Are you putting that on or off the table?
Well, look, Arnett, again, I don't want to get into hypotheticals. I think I was very clear at the top that should U.S. forces be targeted by Iran or its proxies, we'll take necessary steps to defend our people. And I think we've also been very clear that we're going to support the defense of Israel. And so I'm not going to get into theoretical or speculative operations at this stage, other than to say, you know, we mean what we say and we say what we mean.
And then a follow-up question. Iran claims to have used a new Fatah missile, which is supposed to be a hypersonic ballistic missile. Can you assess whether they did use new and advanced weaponry in this attack and whether they learned from the April attack?
Again, we're still assessing the attack and the outcomes, and so, you know, we may have more to provide later, but I don't have anything on that right now. Dan.
Thanks for your time. Two questions, please. On Secretary Austin's statement last night, he referred to being supportive of operations along the border. Is he open to Israel using operations on both sides of the border? Along the border was a little vague there.
Well, I think I'd go back to how I responded to Joseph, right? We understand and support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah, as we highlighted in the readout. We understand that part of that is dismantling some of the attack infrastructure that Hezbollah has built along the border. Certainly, again, we don't want to see this, you know, broaden into a wider regional conflict, but we understand, again, that what Israel is doing are limited operations to destroy that attack infrastructure, and then enable citizens on both sides of the border to return home. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we do think that a diplomatic resolution is the only way to achieve lasting stability and security across the Israel-Lebanon border. So, you know, we're going to continue to work to that end. But we also, again, understand Israel's need to defend itself.
And then a follow. The State Department read out a report on an attack on a diplomatic facility at Baghdad Airport last night. Have you seen any other attacks on U.S. forces, I guess, since Friday? This one would seem to be on a diplomatic facility, but be it in the last day, particularly at this heightened time of tension, or just broadly over the last couple of days?
Yeah, as of right now, I'm not aware of any additional attacks. Thanks. Sir.
The Iron Dome, how effective is it against ballistic missiles and
All right, we've been listening to the Department of Defense Press Secretary, Major General Pat Ryder, answering and avoiding answering some specific questions from reporters. So by now you've heard the latest information from the Pentagon, the White House, and the State Department on Iran's largest and most violent attack against Israel. We've got Sam Vinograd and Courtney Keeley here with us as part of this ongoing breaking coverage. And Sam, one thing that stood out to me at multiple press conferences is the question of NEOs were asked, these non-combatant evacuation operations, specifically for, I guess, Americans in Lebanon. It does not appear that the U.S. is taking that action yet. But what would that mean if that does happen? What's the barrier there? Because certainly tensions in the region are escalated now.
Well, Errol, the U.S. government has been planning for potentially multiple non-combatant evacuation operations from multiple embassies in the region since October 7th. I was in the room as part of those discussions, and it was viewed as prudent planning based upon the dynamic security situation. It is worth noting that the U.S. has already pre-positioned specific assets in maritime waters in the region that would support a NEO if one was needed. In particular, you mentioned Lebanon. I will note our embassy staff in Lebanon is quite small at this juncture. They've been diminishing numbers over a period of time based upon the security situation. But a NEO, a decision To go to a NEO would be a decision made by the State Department with support from the Department of Defense, and that has not yet occurred. Based on my experience, whether or not to engage in a NEO in Lebanon, in Israel, in Saudi, in Qatar, or elsewhere is reviewed on a daily, if not twice daily basis based upon the dynamic security situation. So we should wait to see whether a NEO is implemented, but there are assets pre-positioned to assist with a NEO as soon as that decision is made.
Sam Vinograd joining us from our Washington Bureau. I really appreciate all of your insight on this developing story today. Courtney Keeley has been with me here in Studio 57, and you've had extensive experience on the ground reporting from many of these places. In summary, what happened today and what will this do to the people, the many different peoples in the region?
First of all, Iran showed that they have a reach. They can hit Jerusalem. They can hit Tel Aviv. They rarely show their hand. We saw it in April after several Iranian Revolutionary Guard were killed in Damascus by Israeli strikes. It took about a week for them to respond. They did it slowly. They let the U.S. and Israel's other allies be prepared. This time, it took about 3 to 4 days after the death of Hassan Nasrallah, but it still happened. You have decimated humanitarian populations in northern Israel, southern Israel, in Gaza, and now into Lebanon, spilling into Syria, which is a hostile environment for refugees. It's a hostile environment for Syrian refugees going back to their homeland after they fled the brutalities of President Assad. You have very limited governing power in Lebanon, and you have about 16, 17 different religious sects that all speak for themselves. Nasrallah's supporters, this is an ideology that spreads to a vision of an Islamic State playing the long game. Now you have Deputy General Naim Qassem saying he is going to continue this fight. He is very well versed in military tactics. He was the southern commander when Israel had that so-called buffer zone for nearly 20 years. These grudges are long. This will continue. This is not a one-off. This is a lot of things are happening in the shadows. We have to look at Ain al-Assad base, where the U.S. service men and women are also based, taking out ISIS in Syria. Yeah. They were supposed to withdraw. They're vulnerable. A lot of vulnerabilities for a lot of people right now, and nobody de-escalating.
And things are complicated, and certainly we've all witnessed things shift today. Courtney Keeley, thank you so much for your experience and your insight. We'll, of course, continue to speak with CBS News journalists and contributors along U.S. agencies and in the region as we gather more information on this breaking story. Coming up after the break, some of that coverage and a preview of tonight's only vice presidential debate before the U.S. election. Stay right where you are. This is CBS News 24/7.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
Of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America. Weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024? Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York as we continue to follow breaking news. Iran has launched a missile attack against Israel. Now, we want to show you a video that we aired a short time ago as the rockets were incoming into Israel. The IDF says those explosions were the incoming missiles being intercepted as people in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv were warned to head to shelter. You heard some of the sounds there. Iran's mission to the UN says this attack has now been completed. It released a statement saying if Israel retaliates, quote, a subsequent and crushing response will ensue. Now, this attack came in response to the Israeli military launching what it described as a limited incursion into southern Lebanon and the killings of several top Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. This is part of Israel's efforts to combat Hezbollah in the region and to secure its own safety. We want to give you a sense of the bigger picture here, where this conflict is taking place. You can see just how far physically Iran is from Israel. They're separated by Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Iran's leadership has been facing pressure to respond to Israel after its troops went in on the ground in southern Lebanon. Now, U.S. defense officials say that the United States helped intercept some of the incoming missiles to defend Israel. Israel's Iron Dome system, for example, was seen shooting down the missiles as they flew over the country. Officials were telling people there to shelter in place. The latest information from the IDF is that it's safe to exit. Now, explosions were heard in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and at this stage, the IDF says it isn't aware of the full extent of damage or potential casualties just yet. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is on the ground in Tel Aviv covering this story for us. And Liz, the last time we spoke, you had your protective jacket on and your helmet because you were in the target zone. Tell us what you're hearing now and what that experience was like.
Well, we were in the shelter first and then decided to creep out to see if we could see the interceptors. And as soon as we got out onto our balcony, we could see all the missiles coming from the east, so from Iran, and being intercepted over our heads. It's remarkably quiet, but you see these flashes of light and then the slow fall of the shrapnel, often glowing. It was very hard to know then whether anything was being hit. We didn't hear any loud crashes or booms. And as you said, the IDF has since said that although they say some of the incoming missiles did hit the earth, There don't appear to be any casualties, which is very good news. Shortly afterwards, the hotel told us that we were free to come out of the shelter, and I can see the traffic is getting back to normal on the street. I even saw a man walking his dog. So Israelis who have nerves of steel because they're used to this are getting back to life pretty quickly. Although I must say, I think we spoke earlier about the shooting attack that happened just a mile down the coast. That's rattled people. You know, 2 men got off a train and started spraying the area with bullets. It was a terrorist attack. And although both of those terrorists have been killed, the night feels full of danger.
And despite your description of folks there having, nerves of steel, I can just imagine that experiencing this type of thing on a semi-regular basis affects people. It impacts them psychologically. And we know that what's at the root of this, it seems, is that there is pressure to reach some type of ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. We're approaching the 1-year anniversary of Hamas's incursion into Israel. And so the events that unfolded today, does it seem, is it something that Israelis will be even more interested in a diplomatic solution to the conflict?
Yes, because everybody wants security, but it has never looked so remote. I was here myself 2 weeks ago, and people were approaching the anniversary of the October 7th massacre, starting to say things like, we really need to get this negotiation done so the hostages can come home and then move on to the massive task of rebuilding and perhaps even beginning to talk about how the Palestinians might have their own state in parallel with Israel and so on. That's just 2 weeks ago. I can't tell you, that feels so remote now tonight. We have a hot war in the north now. Gaza, there's been bombing night and day. The terrorist attack, the Iranian attack, it feels unstable, and honestly, constructive thinking just is out of sight. It's just not happening. Very sad.
And I would imagine it is somewhat of a wake-up call, not just for people there in Israel, but the entire region, that things have escalated and could get worse. Do we have any sense of how Israel might respond and the U.S. might help?
I think those plans are being made now. This attack, while it was anticipated, nobody knew exactly how big it would be and how serious it would be. It's an escalation, and Israel is probably deciding now how to respond and whether it can afford to amp up its military effort. Its army is very tired. They've been fighting hard in Gaza for a year. We've now got land incursions into Lebanon. The Israeli military establishment and politicians will be thinking very, very hard about the risk of getting overstretched. It's too early to tell what we're going to see. Everybody's breathing a sigh of relief, and it'll be all eyes on the politicians in the coming days.
It's just remarkable to see some of the footage from a short time ago. Liz Palmer, we appreciate your reporting as always. Stay safe. We now want to bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger from Jerusalem. Last time we spoke, you were hearing sirens in the distance. We understand the IDF has given the all clear, but give us the latest, Robert, from your point of view.
Yes, as you say, the all clear after 2 waves of attacks from Iran, with the sirens going on here in Jerusalem and actually all over Israel, and these sort of orange shooting stars looking like of shrapnel falling here in Jerusalem. I could see it from where I am, and actually all over Israel. And now the all clear. So, but still, the nation's shaken up, and the question is, what happens next? How will Israel respond?
And we know that if we rewind a year ago to the October 7th attacks from Hamas into Israel, that the push for some type of ceasefire and hostage release from Hamas specifically is what predicated what we're now seeing as far as Israel's ground incursion into Lebanon, which is reported, but we've not yet confirmed. What is the Israeli hunger for a ceasefire? I mean, considering that you and other people living there experience this, the sirens and running into a basement, as part of regular life.
Well, people are tired. I mean, it's nearly a year of this war. A lot of soldiers have been killed, and a lot of soldiers are doing reserve duty month after month. People are exhausted. This kind of attack also affects businesses. For instance, restaurants in Tel Aviv, which are popular, preparing food all day, and this came on all of a sudden. It was with very little warning that this attack occurred, and all these restaurants had to close down. So people are tired, but having said that, you have a year of attacks from Lebanon by Hezbollah that have put 60,000 Israelis at least out of their homes. And then also the war in Gaza, which we're talking about less nowadays, still hasn't really been resolved. And you have 100 hostages there that, of course, everyone wants to see come home. But I would just say it's the situation is unresolved. And so people feel that Israel has a right to defend itself, and the government is threatening to take very severe action.
I believe it was last week at the UN General Assembly when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a fiery speech and then was rushed with his team, the Israelis releasing images that appear to show him on communication devices before the attack that killed the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Do we know where the Prime Minister is today, and has he released a statement yet on this incident?
Not yet, but the cabinet, the security cabinet, is due to meet shortly to discuss what Israel's response is going to be. And obviously, we've heard from certain Israeli officials, not the prime minister himself, that Israel has a right to defend itself. And that we're hearing also from sources, government sources, that Israeli reaction will be severe.
Robert Berger, our contributor, joining us from Jerusalem with the latest on this unfolding event. We appreciate your insight. Thank you for that.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party? Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024? Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
For those of you just joining us here on CBS News 24/7, I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York as we continue to gather information after Iran launched a series of missiles into Israel. We're still waiting for word from the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, on if there have been any casualties or damages, but we watched live pictures as its defense systems intercepted those dozens of missiles that were incoming. We now want to bring in CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis. She's following all of this for us from the State Department. Olivia, as this was unfolding, the Secretary of State canceled a public appearance he was meant to deliver. What is the latest information from your vantage point?
Sure, Errol. And as you mentioned, we are awaiting those briefings from various government agencies. But Secretary Blinken himself appears to be back on regular schedule. He's expected to meet within moments with the Indian foreign minister, who is here in Washington to meet with the secretary. And it appears right now as though the U.S. government is not anticipating further developments. It's too soon to say with definitive surety, but that appears to be the situation. We know on a bigger picture that the Biden administration's overwhelming goal since October 7th has been to forestall a regional conflagration that draws in multiple actors. Arguably, it's hard to say that hasn't already happened, but the crucial indicator will be what Israel does from here and what the U.S. determines to do. Obviously, this morning, officials vowing severe consequences if Iran takes this step, but it's worth noting that Iran had been holding back for weeks, if not months, as Israel took a number of escalatory steps, taking out a Hezbollah commander in Beirut in July, followed by the assassination in Tehran of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, for which the Iranians did not retaliate. Those spectacular pager attacks that we saw in September that affected the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. All throughout that, U.S. and Israeli officials have said that it was a combination of deterrence and diplomacy that kept the Iranians from taking a broader retaliatory strike. That all changed once the Israelis took the very monumental step of eliminating Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, last week. I was in a room full of senior Israeli officials minutes after that strike was taken at the UN General Assembly. And, the question was posed whether or not the calculus was made, whether this would draw in the Iranians or deter them further. Obviously, we've seen something of a measured response so far from the Iranians. Remains to be seen whether they've hit any targets, caused any civilian casualties, affected any U.S. interests. But if this is the extent of it, you can expect the U.S. to be working diplomatically in overdrive to persuade the Israelis to keep their own response contained and, again, prevent the region from tipping into a broader escalatory spiral. That's what they've been working on from the get-go.
And it's fascinating, Olivia, because at roughly this time last week, while you were at the UNGA, I was asking you, it's all about diplomacy and peaceful resolutions. How the heck do we get there? And you said it remains elusive. Now we have this happening, and the consistent the consistent thread from U.S. government officials appears to continue to be de-escalation. But based on your reporting, based on what you saw last week, based on what you're seeing now, how do we get there?
It's very hard to imagine, Errol. I mean, the Gaza ceasefire efforts seem to have dwindled and diminished in recent weeks. At the end of August, Hamas essentially disengaged. We had not heard from Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, engaging with negotiators from Israel, from Qatar, from the United States, who had been trying to put forth a bridging proposal in order to get that over the finish line to start phase one of a ceasefire in Gaza. U.S. negotiators switched their efforts to broker a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah. That was sort of what the focus was last week, the U.S. coordinating a group of more than 10 international allies to sign on to a call for a 21-day ceasefire. They put that on the table on Wednesday evening. By Friday morning, we had heard of this giant strike by the Israelis in Lebanon on Hassan Nasrallah. And so that the prospects of that kind of a ceasefire agreement coming to pass also evaporated in an instant. Those senior Israeli officials did indicate at the time that it's something that's worth considering. They said that they would consider sending an envoy to entertain those kinds of ceasefire discussions, but now is most certainly not the time for the U.S. to try to push those further, although I'm sure the messaging will be that de-escalation and diplomacy is the right path forward. That's consistently what they have said until this point.
And Olivia, I'm wondering what sense you pick up from how Israeli and U.S. officials interact with each other, because for months, if not a full year, we've heard this disconnect of the U.S. saying we need to find a peaceful resolution, a ceasefire, and de-escalation, and Israel consistently saying we need to defend ourselves against incoming attempts to wipe us off the map. That's the typical phrase from Israeli officials. From what you can tell, how do they, I don't know, get along? How do they communicate with one another on this highly contentious topic of how to reach the goal of peace?
Sure. Well, it's important to note, I think, that the conversations take part on multiple levels amid multiple officials and agencies. The conversation is not in a singular channel. And absolutely, those channels have been tense. They've been contentious. There have been sharp words exchanged among nothing less than the leadership level. President Biden has been candid about the fact that he has been very forthcoming with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But there are also sort of working level talks that take place day to day with officials exchanging information about what's going on. That diplomatic churn behind the scenes sort of fills out the policies that the U.S. tries to coordinate with the Israelis. Even in the case of this 21-day ceasefire, we understood from senior U.S. officials that that proposal had been based on close consultations with senior Israeli officials. It wound up being the case that the Israelis decided to pursue a different avenue, obviously not the diplomatic outcome that the U.S. was hoping it would agree to, but seizing the opportunity to take this strike on Nasrallah. And so I think what that indicates for you is that national interests will almost always trump diplomatic engagement. But of course, again, these are very close and tight allies. The conversations are continuing, and U.S. officials have always argued that the reason that they can have candid conversations is because the relationship is so close, despite how strained it may have gotten over the past almost year.
Olivia, I think it's so useful for our viewers to hear that from you, that there are layers of diplomacy taking place between nations, and ultimately each nation has to protect its own interests, but still the conversations, the dialogue, the efforts to get to a peaceful outcome continue. Thank you very much. Stay close. We'll certainly lean on your reporting in the hours ahead.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
All right, I can tell you, final preparations are underway all over this building for the vice presidential debate tonight. We can give you a live look, in fact, outside of the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York City. The candidates are facing off here shortly. It's the only time Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz are set to meet and discuss important issues before Election Day. The CBS News hosted debate will begin at 9 p.m. Eastern and last approximately 90 minutes. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is here with me in person in Studio 57 to break down what we can expect. This is a huge moment for the vice presidential candidates and for the campaign in general. How have they prepared for tonight?
They have been prepared.